Hey, everybody, welcome to the Fire and Forget podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Ryan. Today is episode 7. I'm recording with Paul Toolan. He is executive of Donovan Bank Foundation, which is a nonprofit out of North Carolina where they work directly and solely with special operators. All right. So a little bit about Paul before I turn it over to him to introduce himself a little bit is he is Army veteran, Green Beret, 36 years of service, enlisted to commissioned officer. He is highly involved community member when it comes to the transition and as with the nonprofit. And then also he's a family man. You know, his sons are still in high school. His wife are all still locally in North Carolina. Anyways, I want to say hello to everybody.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for making the effort to do this. I think before we started, when we were in the green room, which isn't actually a green room, it's just us sitting here, but it just means we weren't recording at the time. I told you that during the pandemic, a friend of mine and we did a little podcast called The Best Pandemic Ever. We just did it for fun, right? It is not lost on me the effort that's required to do something like this, and the fact that you are out on the road doing this is pretty remarkable. Like, I know what it takes to do that kind of thing. We pride ourselves at the Donovan Bank Foundation on being an organization that is predicated on action. We do things. There are thousands of veteran service organizations that don't do shit. They are website deep. You go there, a lot of donate buttons. They throw things at veterans, but they don't actually get out there and do things. So I really appreciate the fact that not only that you asked me to do this and be on your podcast, but the fact that you actually came all the way out here to do that. That's a huge deal. So I appreciate it. This is fun. I just love doing this and having good conversations.
So that's one of the things that I definitely wanted to. I mean, I said it in my first introductory video. I was saying, "What's up? Thank you for waiting on me." I mean, I told people I was going to start a podcast, and they were like, "What do you mean, bro? I'm going to go on the road. I want to do it in person." I only did one virtual interview, and it's because I got recommended. I was still active duty. I couldn't get to New Jersey to interview this guy he's a media guy. He also does recruiting in the Marine Corps reservist. Anyways, one deployment. He's a nice guy. His name's Benny. Except for sometimes, by the way.
Yeah, you didn't miss anything by not going to New Jersey. So
I am 100% aware. I honestly didn't want to go because I carry guns. And it's like every state that I go to in the Northeast, I'm like pretty much banned from going to the state. So obviously we're about to talk about yourself. And, I'm breaking it down for everybody. This is about you. This is your financial history, your time in service, coming on out, why you chose to transition. In your case, it's because it was time. 36 years is a long time. So we'll kick it. We'll start. Where are you from? Which I know where you're from, but everybody else gets to know about you. And then we'll talk about your childhood and stuff like upbringing, and then what brought you into recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, so I was born and raised in Rhode Island, so originally a New Englander, card carrying member of the Patriots Nation. Sorry, people there was a time people don't realize this, but before the Patriots were a dynasty, we sucked. And so I'm really accustomed to, the Patriots sucking. So we actually enjoy being in that space. So my point is, even though Brady's gone, I'm still a Patriots fan. Now, but, both my wife and I are kind of fast forward. Look, my childhood was what I would characterize as relatively unremarkable, right? I mean, pretty garden variety. I was very lucky. My dad was an educator for 30 years. My mom was a homemaker, and then she was a bookkeeper. I got 2 older sisters, so I was the youngest of 3. Just relatively, I don't want to say mundane because it wasn't, but relatively garden variety upbringing. New England middle class family, both my parents are gone, but my wife is also from Rhode Island originally, so we're both from Rhode Island. Ironically, both my sons are Tar Heels. I mean, they were born here in North Carolina, right? Which is weird for me and my wife to kind of wrap our heads around. But yeah, I got so we grew up in Rhode Island. The son of working class folks, and I joined the Army in 1986.
So before we get into your Army experience completely. What hobbies did you do? Like growing up, I want people to know a little bit more about you, like hobbies, activities. Did you travel a lot with your family? Because I think that what are the driving factors for most people to join the military is what I want to break down. It's kind of hard to explain. Most people, it's just a sense to call to serve, right? And especially in your case, this was what, 1986, right?
Yeah, 86. I joined. Yeah, I
So
joined in 86. It's really weird. It's funny because when you get to be my age, right, I'm 55 years old, so I'm even a little bit older than your average military retiree, right? Because I mean, I got buddies who did 20 years in service and they retired when they're 38 years old. They're babies. You know what I mean? So I'm a little bit of an anomaly in that way. And honestly, sometimes it's hard for me to remember what those driving factors were when I was a young man, when I was 18 years old. I can tell you that I had I called him an uncle, but he wasn't technically an uncle. He was my mother's first cousin, but my mother was an only child, so he was more like an uncle. And he was in the National Guard. He ended up retiring as a 1-star in the National Guard. And I was involved. He got me involved in this in this Revolutionary War. What do they call them? Not role players, but you know what I mean. It was like a Revolutionary War recreation organization. It's called the Warren Federal Blues, and I got involved in that when I was kind of young, and so I was kind of hung out with him a bit. I think he sort of influenced my decision to join. But honestly, back in 1986, you got to remember where we were at. I mean, we were soundly in the middle of nothing, right? We were definitely well past Vietnam. The Gulf War wasn't even a blip on the radar. When was Grenada? I mean, there was just there was nothing, right? So we're in the middle of nothing. So it was very attractive then to just join for the college benefits and all those other kind of things. I didn't probably at that time. I can't say for sure. I didn't really think of it as like it was going to be this, lifelong. It's going to take more than a third of my life, more than half of my life, as a career and a profession. I think my motivations back then were just way more pragmatic. It was like a really good opportunity to get college paid for, and then I started doing it. It was like it stuck. For whatever reason, I found the structure really appealing. I don't think that had anything to do with who I was as in my upbringing or any of my hobbies, or I mean, Jesus, who can remember their hobbies when they were 18 years old? You know what I mean? Being an idiot, and I was, again, I always had a lot of we placed a lot of value on work when I was growing up. So getting a job was always paramount. So I started working at a young age. I was working at a warehouse cleaning up when I was, I think, maybe 15. Possibly it was 14. That's probably illegal even back then. But I was working in a warehouse. Then I started working in a grocery store. So working was always a big, was highly valued in our family. So we all worked. But I can't really, I don't know that I can tie my drive to join to anything specifically in my background other than these influences from my uncle and a general interest in sort of the order and adventure of it. And then of course when I joined, I didn't do anything adventurous. I think my first MOS was I was a communications guy. It was a 31 uniform. That MOS doesn't even exist anymore. It's long gone. It was a radio repairman. And so that's kind of where I started out with that. But anyway, growing up, I mean, I guess, we were ocean people, which is why we're in Wilmington. So unbeknownst to, you couldn't tell from this small video snapshot, but, we divide our time between Wilmington, North Carolina and Fayetteville, North Carolina. And if anybody doesn't know, Fayetteville, North Carolina is the center of the universe because it is it's the home of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I'm retired, so I can say whatever the hell I want, and I'll always call it Fort Bragg, despite the fact that they have recently changed the name to something else, which I won't dignify by calling it that. But yeah, so we divide our time because we're ocean folks. My wife and I both when we were trying to decide what are we going to do after I retire or move on to the next thing, we were grappling between the ocean and the mountains because we love both. And then we came out here one weekend, and when we were sort of looking around, we were like, man, what are we even thinking about? Like, this is where we need to be. So, grew up around the ocean, and that was kind of our identity, But it had nothing to do with me joining, So there's this kind of they seem to be very two separate things. Like how I lived my life as a young person didn't necessarily lead me into my service. I think it was more almost serendipitous that I joined when I joined, and again, it was mostly for pragmatic reasons.
So, in your case, you're talking about post-Soviet Union falling, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is like a few years afterwards. So like, this is prosperity was huge. We were the powerhouse of the world. We had no competitors. Realistically, you maybe had some special operations type folks that were out doing some stuff around the world. Independent of whatever the case, because SOCOM stood up in '87, right? So like, there wasn't a whole lot going on. So how'd the recruiting process go for you at the time frame that you were coming in? Because I feel like it was probably weird, like going in the recruiting office and like trying to become you, because you went into the Guard first, right?
I did, yeah. I went for the Guard first. And the recruiting process, I remember what happened was, so at the time, the guy that I just referenced, my uncle, he was an '06. He was a brigade commander at the time, and the recruiter came to our house, met with me and my parents, because that's how you did it. Because I was under 18 at the time. I was 17 at the time. Because I joined with what the hell was the name of that program called? It's called Split Option. It was called Split Option. So if you were, high school. Yeah, so you could join when you were less than 18, and then you wouldn't ship anywhere until after 18th birthday, right? It's like they get you early. So I joined under the Split Option, right? So I had the recruiter at our house, and he signed me up for some bullshit. I don't remember what it was, but I remember somehow later I ended up in the office of my uncle, who was a brigade commander and probably an E6 or an E7 recruiter. And my uncle was having a very kind of straightforward conversation with this recruiter about like, well, why don't you sign him up for this and this? And the guy was like, So it changed like my trajectory a little bit, and I ended up in the unit that he commanded. It was 103rd Field Artillery at the time. Very, very storied past of this unit. I think it still exists. I'm not sure, but I think it still exists. But I think it dated back to like Civil War. And so I ended up in that unit, and that's how I ended up going to communication school. But I mean, recruiting is recruiting, man. It's they'll promise you the world, and it's just all you need to do is just sign this attendance roster and get on the bus. And they're pretty good. They're pretty good at that. So God only knows what this guy had talked me into, but my uncle interceded and was like, "Yeah, I think we should have him come over here and do this." Who knows? I wish I could remember what he originally signed me up to do, but I'm sure it sucked, whatever it was.
Yeah. So, what did how long you were in the Guard for? 13 years.
Yeah, what? 10 years. Then I went to OCS. So I was in the Guard for like 10 years in OCS. I went to OCS in. I actually had a brief break in service. That was an interesting time because I remember I got out after my initial enlistment and immediately began to miss it. And at the time, I had just separated, and I think I was on like a 4x2 commitment, something like that. So I had 2 years in the IRR, the Independent Ready Reserve, right? Which means they could call you back if they needed you. And at the time, like very short amount of time after I got out, the Gulf War kicked off. And I remember watching the F-16s or F-14s taken off from that was like in the news, right? It was a big deal. And I immediately missed it. I was like, oh my God, I'm like on the outside looking in now, right? But that kind of abated, and I let it go for a little while. But it just kept gnawing at me. Like I really missed it. And at the time, I've been married twice. And so, at the time I was married to my high school sweetheart. We were only married for a couple of years. But at the time, she was not supportive at all of military service, right? So that was doomed to begin with because I was, really committed to it. But I was out for a couple of years. And finally I was like, oh, the hell with this. I want to get back in. And like literally, I went to a recruiter and I didn't know shit. Like maybe like a week after my IRR status ran out. And he was like, man, if you had come here 2 weeks ago, it'd have been the flip of a switch. He's like, now we got to go through this whole thing again. So anyway, I did. I went through that, whole business again. It wasn't a big deal. And I came back in, and I was in and by then I came back in because when my first 4-year stint, I was what? An E1 to an E4. And I was a shitty one. I wasn't good. That wasn't, a very good soldier. And it was mostly because it was interesting. It was mostly because I couldn't suffer fools very well. And we didn't have, we had some shitty leadership and some, and there was a lot of, what do they call it? A lot of like this weird nepotism. And look, it was post Vietnam era. We had Vietnam vets in that unit, right? I mean, we had guys, there was just some really crazy, shady shit going on all the time. It was like super unprofessional. And so it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So I wasn't a very good soldier. We were going, I'll give you an example of the level of chicanery that transpired there. There was one guy who would show up every drill, and he always had a coffee cup, and it was filled with gin. Everybody knew it, and it was like this quaint thing, right? I mean, this guy was obviously an absolute disaster of a human being. He was a functioning alcoholic, but he was like an author or something else like that, some kind of creative venture. Anyway, and it was just sort of accepted. We were driving to annual training one year. We would go to camp. Was it called Camp Edwards? I think it was called Camp Edwards at the time, in Cape Cod, because that was the only place you could fire 155 howitzers. They had the distance for it, right? And so we were driving up to our annual training. We might have been driving up to Fort Drum. We did annual training up there as well before the 10th Mountain Division was there. It was a little backwater. And we had deuce and a halfs. That's how dated the unit was. And I think it was in like a pickup truck or a rat rig or something. And I remember watching a guy exit the deuce and a half on the highway, exit the deuce and a half on the passenger side, crawl over to the back, get a beer, and go back to the cab. Like, that's the level of profession. And so it didn't appeal to me. I was like, this is a shit show, right? So I got out, and then I decided, then Gulf War kicked off, and I decided I want to get back in. And so I got back in, and then I was fully committed. I was a little more mature. I was more committed. I was like, hey, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to be good no matter what. I'm going to be a professional. And I got into an MP unit. And at the time, again, my uncle had moved up. He was a 1-star in charge of this MP brigade, which is unusual, but it was a unit at the time they called it echelon above corps. And so it was just this weird kind of, it was a brigade level unit, but it was commanded by a 1-star. I don't remember exactly why or how. It was before the modular army and BCTs and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I ended up in that MP unit. And they were really professional. And I had this section sergeant who was, I don't remember his name. It's unfortunate because he was a very important figure in my, in my trajectory, because he was very professional, and he was all about, having your uniform straight and being all that kind of stuff. And so I emulated his example. I followed his example, emulated his professionalism. And I was there maybe a year, and someone was like, oh, you should consider going to OCS. And I was like, what's that? And so I ended up going to OCS. Now in the Guard, when you go to OCS, you have to follow the exact same federal program. The federal program takes, I think it's 12 weeks. You have to match that hour for hour of instruction. So when you go through the Guard, you have to do like 2 years of OCS. And it sucks. It's the worst, man, because they just wear your ass out for like 2 years every time you go to drill. So you do 2 years, and you do 2 AT periods. One, with your first year, and then what you do is you would fall in on the tail end of ROTC summer camp. So they would have been doing their ROTC summer camp, and then all the Guard OCS guys would show up from all over the country, and they did it in 2 locations. So I went to OCS, got commissioned, and really interesting. This is not interesting, maybe not an interesting story, but at our OCS dining in, we did a dining in. For people who don't know, dining is just a formal event that you do in a unit. And we did a dining in, and this this 06 who was in the state. He worked for he was an AGR, active guard and reserve, so he was an active guy. Did it full time, and he got shit faced drunk at this dining in, and it fell on me because I was a title for the role I had at the dining in. It was called, it wasn't a Master of Ceremonies, but it was Mr. Vice. Can't believe I remember that. So I was Mr. Vice. Anyway, it fell on me to prevent this guy from driving home. I'm an OCS candidate, and this guy's an 06, and he's drunk and angry. So I kept his keys. I wouldn't give them to him. And then the next day, he had sobered up and gave his keys, and off he went. So when I graduated at OCS, they wanted to commission me as a field artillery lieutenant. I was like, hey, I got an idea. Fuck that. I don't want to do that. You know what I mean? That sounds lame. And so I was like, you could just give me my E6 back. And so when I graduated, I didn't get commissioned because I didn't accept the commission that they offered me. But it was understood that I could go out and farm around and see if I could get a position doing something else. And at that time, I had already kind of started figuring I wanted to go into special operations. Like that had already appealed to me. Had a little bit to do with one of our instructors at OCS, who was just an uncompromising asshole about something. He was just not a decent, you know what I mean? He was really, really hard guy, but he was a Green Beret. And so I decided that I wanted to do that. Well, the only pathway in the Rhode Island Army National Guard to the Green Berets, because they have a Green Beret unit there, Alpha Company, 2nd Battalion, 19th Group. The only pathway is you have to have an infantry. You had to be an infantry officer, because they had the XO position was an infantry billet or something. Doesn't matter. So I had to get that billet. So I had to be commissioned infantry, and the only way I could do it was to get that slot. So I had to go and interview with the company commander, who at the time was a god. Now I've been a deputy group commander on active duty, like nobody. But at the time, this guy was like everything. And so I had to go and interview with this guy to try and get that slot. Well, it turns out that after I had that interview, the 06, who I had prevented from driving himself home drunk, called the company commander and said, "Take this guy." So as a result, I ended up going. So they took me into the SF company as an XO. They sent me to infantry officer basic school. They sent me to airborne school. They sent me to ranger school. And then when I had completed all that shit, then I was eligible to go to SFAS. So I spent about 2 years going through that process, and ultimately went to SFAS through Alpha 219. Made it through that. Deployed with them, and as soon as and at that point I was like, man, I'm doing this full time. Why the hell am I not going to go active duty? And so that's when I decided to go active duty. At the time I went through the Q course, though, I was the only second lieutenant in the Army that was. So I graduated the Q course as a second lieutenant. I was at the time. I'm sure it's not still remarkable to this day, I think. But at the time, I was like the only second lieutenant that had the crossed arrows, and I got a lot of strange looks, around Fayetteville at the time. But anyway, yeah, that was kind of my trajectory that got my foot in the door.
So you commissioned, right? You go through, you find your way into this company by a miraculous event, basically, which is pretty amazing, by the way. And then you ended up deploying. Where did you deploy to at the time?
My first deployment was to Kosovo. So I was part of KFOR back when, it was the Balkans first, Bosnia. And then, a lot of people don't remember our foray into Kosovo. But I was there attached to 10th Special Forces Group. So we went one team from 19th Special Forces Group, went, and we were attached to 10th Group to augment the company that was there. And it's funny because a friend of mine now, H.B. Gillum, who retired as a 1-star from Special Warfare Center and School, because usually the deputy there at Special Warfare Center and School, the deputy commanding general, is usually a guard guy. So HB was a guard guy his whole career, but mostly on active duty. We know each other really well. Well, back then he was like the S3 for the battalion, and they kind of picked me. They were like, "Hey, this kid's got his act together. His team should go." And so so we got to go. It was interesting because right about that time, I was getting ready to, before the deployment, I was getting ready to drop my paperwork to go on active duty, which means I would have missed the deployment. Somebody else would have had to go, and we had been training for it and everything else. And I remember the company commander at the time, Bill Conley, great guy. He was like, "Hey, look," he's like, "I'll support." He's like, "I'll support whatever you want to do. If you want to go on active duty," he's like, "I'm not going to stop you." He's like, "But you made this, but you made an obligation. You made a commitment. You have an obligation." And he said, and it was great. It was a great lesson in leadership, because he didn't say, "So by God, you're going to go on this deployment." What he said essentially was, "You will probably regret it if you don't go on this deployment, because not living up to that obligation will probably bother you for a long time." And I was like, "Yeah, you're probably right." So I put off going on active duty, and I went on this deployment to Kosovo, and it was great. I mean, it was a great deployment. I remember, my memory is shit, like most of us, right? I mean, I did this for a long time, so my long-term memory is not good. And that could just be, that's not necessarily related to my service per se, maybe some, but it also could be just a function of age and just men, I think in general, have shitty long-term memory.
You know what I think about that, by the way?
Yeah.
I do think it's just how much you have to compartmentalize information and how much information you're receiving throughout your career and how you have to do so much critical thinking. It just makes it hard for you to remember intricate details of like specific things and like dates.
Yeah.
Like you remember the overall arching theme of what was going on and where you went to and some of the people that you interact with, but it's so hard to remember like what color that dude's shirt was 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Like you could do it at the time frame. You can remember everything. Remember, you can license plates, whatever the case is. But like when you're thinking about past, you're like, what the fuck did I do on that time?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Just passes over you.
But so acknowledging that I have, kind of poor recollection of long-term events, but I remember it like it was yesterday. The day we got to Kosovo, and it was like trains, planes, and automobiles. It was ridiculous trying to get there because we were like this one team of SF guys from the Guard. They don't know what the fuck to do with us. So I mean, we literally like jumped on a CH-47 going from Macedonia into Kosovo. We're like, oh, let's go. We're like throwing our shit. It was crazy. And we get there, and like literally when we got there, they send us out to the house. We were partnered with the Polish Ukrainian battalion. So they send us out there. The team that's already there is gone. They're on the border doing some who knows what, because there had been an incursion on the Macedonian border. So they were out. And so we had to go, they're like, great, you're here. You can take all these supplies out to them and link up with them out in the field. So we go, and I remember we pull up to this area, and it's as far as the vehicles can go. We got to go the rest of the way on foot. And I remember the moment that I stepped out of that vehicle and put my foot on the ground. Because it was the first time I was like, am I going to step on mine? Like, it was the first time that shit was real. And I remember it. Now, in retrospect, I got to Kosovo and I was like, oh my God, this place is war torn. You know what I mean? And there's mines everywhere and everything's shot. And then I got to Afghanistan and I was like, fucking Kosovo was like Paris, man. I was like, that place is the city of lights. I was like, it was like, it was a whole different thing, right? So, because we operated around there relatively freely, and it wasn't like what happened later. But that was my first deployment, was Kosovo. And then when I came back from that deployment, I dropped my paperwork to go back on active duty, and that was in July of 2001. And lo and behold, in September of 2001, it all kicked off, and I was like, oh man, they're gonna put my paperwork through in a minute because they need everybody. That's when I learned that the gears of the DoD bureaucracy do not change speed for anything. Like the little old ladies in tennis shoes, they show up at 8, they go home at 4, and your paperwork's in a pile. And when it gets to the top of the pile, it will be properly processed. That shit didn't change at all. So it still took me a while to come back on active duty. I didn't come back on active duty. I didn't get my orders to come back on active duty until February of 2002. So what's that? September, October, November, December, January, February, like 6 months later. And I thought, I'm like, that's it, man. Everybody get on the bus. No, not at all. So my first deployment was to Kosovo with Alpha 219, and it was really, really an interesting deployment. Like I said, it was relatively quiet, but still there was some shit going on. And this is not remarkable in any way. I mean, state cops, EMTs, nurses, everybody deals with this. But I remember that's the first time I saw my first combat casualty, first time that I saw a guy that had been killed in a mortar attack that we had been talking to like 2 days prior. So there's some, interesting learning experiences there. So that was my first deployment, Kosovo.
So that was what, 99 then or something like that?
We got there in January of 01 and we finished up in July of 01.
Oh shit, that was a lot later than I thought it was going to be. Well, Africa Theater is never gonna relax ever. So, okay. So you finally get active duty orders, what, July 21 or
No,
this is
like
22.
February
20,
yeah,
that's right, because it took 6
February
months.
02, yeah.
What was the move, and where'd you get placed, and all that stuff?
Because I had such an unusual career trajectory, I was able to get. So on active duty, you're not eligible for selection as an officer until you've completed the captain's career course. So that's, when you're an officer, you go to your basic course, then you go to your advanced course or your career course, and then later on you go to your intermediate level education, you're a major or something like that. But you couldn't go to selection until you were, you were promotable to captain and you had completed the captain's career course. I went through SFAS and the Q course as a second lieutenant with no career course because the guard was like, whatever. So I went. So I was already qualified. I was already an SF qualified officer. But the Army was like, you haven't gone to the career course. So that's step one. So the first thing I did, the first orders I got was to the captain's career course at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And so that was my first. That was my first like active duty assignment. And it's funny, my wife brings it up to this day. When we got married. So I met so prior to going to Kosovo, right? I had gotten divorced like a year before that from my first wife. Again, we were kids. We didn't have any property, no kids, nothing. So I got divorced from my first wife. And then I was just getting ready to go. And my sister was like, oh, you got to meet this girl. I think you guys really hit it off, and we just never got around to it. I was like, yeah, whatever. I got to go. I'm going on this deployment. Maybe. So I go on this deployment. And then my now wife, went out with my sister one night, had a few too many martinis, and came home and emailed me. So my wife Christine, she emailed me. She's like, hey, I'm Christine, and your sister, and this and so we started having this correspondence while I was in Kosovo. And at some point, I was like, hey, during this deployment, I get like a 4-day pass to Germany. Do you want to come and meet me? And she was like, sure. So we had like our first date in Germany while I was on pass from Kosovo. So we technically met while I was on a deployment. Anyway, came back from the deployment. We were together, and I proposed to her, and we got married before we moved to Fort Knox. But the whole thing was, I was already SF qualified. I was already qualified in French. So, and at the time, that was 10th group. So I was going to 10th group. That's what the Army and I had discussed, right? So when I come on active duty, I'll finish the captain's career course, and then, you go to 10th group. So it even said it in our wedding announcement. It was like, the couple will reside at, Fort Carson, Colorado, blah, blah, blah. And so I went to the captain's career course, so that discussion with the Army was prior to 9/11, right? It's like, oh yeah, 10th group, you'll get assessed and you go to, then 9/11 kicked off, and it was like third group was just balls deep in it all. You know what I mean? So they're like, hey, good news, you're not going to 10th group, you're going to third group. And literally the month after we moved there, I was gone. I deployed on my first Afghan deployment. But my wife says to this day, you know what I mean? It was like, Dumb and Dumber. She's like, that John Denver is full of shit. The Rockies were nowhere in our picture. So we were supposed to be going to Colorado, and we ended up in Fayetteville. That's a slightly different delivery than, like if I promised this girl who I'm marrying that we're moving to Colorado, and then we ended in Fayetteville. If anybody knows Fayetteville, a little bit. And then I left. Like a month later, I'm gone, leaving her there completely alone, but it all worked out. So yeah, that's where I was supposed to end up. But then I ended up in third group because they just need, they need people.
At the time, this is you took off March, April of 2002. And what part of Afghanistan did you end up in your first deployment? And what was your role? What were you up to?
I ended up in Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Special Forces. And when I got there, all the teams were filled. So I was like the XO. I was the company XO, waiting for a team to open. Because that's your entry-level job as team leader, right? On a Special Forces detachment. What's that?
It's kind of weird to be the XO first.
It is, but that's what, they stuck me there because, it's just, that's just where they had room for me while I waited for a team to open up. So my first deployment was to Kabul. Because at the time, that was right after 5th group came in, whooped ass, Taliban's all done, everything was very quiet. And so our role at that time was to build the Afghan National Army. So we were at a place called the KMTC, the Kabul Military Training Center, which now, I mean, back then it was like 4 buildings, you know what I mean, and a fuel tank. I mean, there's nothing. The little chow hall, which was really a tent, just, for the Afghan National Army. But that was the beginning of building the Afghan National Army, right? And so they didn't know what to do with me. I was an XO. I wasn't a team leader. The teams were out, like kind of building the Afghan National Army, bringing guys in, all this other kind of stuff. And they didn't really know what to do with me, so they made me a brigade mentor. So at the time, the Afghan National Army had 3 brigade headquarters. Not really. Again, these were like old old Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, Russian trained guys, all these mixed bag of guys. But they had these 3 brigades, and my role was supposed to be a brigade mentor, part of a brigade mentor team. So it was me, my now very good friend Thomas, who was a Danish officer, and this guy Colonel Duffy, who was a Kiwi. He was a New Zealand officer, and we made up this 3-man brigade mentorship team to go and mentor the Afghan brigade headquarters, there were 3 of them, but one of them was just one of them had 1 brigade, one of them had 2 brigade, one of them had 1 battalion, one of them had 2 battalions, one of them had so they were very small. So that was my first job.
And then to technical difficulties, my computer's not charging. I don't want this to
you're
kill.
plugging
Yeah. Let me take a moment. We'll pause. We'll come back at it. I'll edit these 2 videos together.
Yes, cool.
Sorry, viewers.
Nah, you're good.
And we're back.
Yeah. So we were talking about me being a brigade mentor, right? But we didn't really. Hell did I know about mentoring a brigade, right? Because Special Forces team is designed to build an indigenous partner force, but only up to the battalion level, right? Special Forces isn't really designed to build an army, because armies require systems and processes and rules and regulations and all this. There's a lot to it, right? We kind of we'll get things done, we'll cobble things together, we'll figure it out. I think as an organization, we're exceptional problem solvers. I know we are. And so, we kind of came up with a pay system, and we had a guy, Andre Nelson. He was a CW4 at the time, I think, long retired, but he was a computer guy. So he built a no kidding server that we could, start storing and making creating a database to keep these guys on. But you're talking about trying to run an army off of a laptop. It was insane. So eventually, during that deployment, the conventional army came in. With something called TF Phoenix, and their purpose was to come in and help, to bring in logisticians and finance people and medical folks, all the systems and process folks that you need to actually build an army. The problem was they weren't good at they were good at doing that kind of stuff, but their area of expertise wasn't teaching others how to do it. That's not what the conventional army really does or understands. But anyway, so it was always kind of this mixed bag, right? So we were really good at teaching and helping others to build things, but we didn't necessarily have the depth of knowledge to build big systems required to run an army. And then the army came in, and they had the depth of knowledge, but not really the expertise in how to transfer that knowledge and teach people. And so that's how you started to develop this unfortunate ethos of trying to transfer our methods and values and beliefs onto the Afghans, which is why it never worked. We tried to mold them in our image, well, that wasn't work. But anyway, Task Force Phoenix was commanded by an 06 named Millie, who you may or may not have heard of. He's now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Yeah, he was an unpleasant, grumpy guy then, so I could only imagine it didn't get much better.
Feel free to talk however you want to about whoever you want to, by the way.
Did you not get the impression that that's how I do things? I am beholden to nobody. Yeah. I am retired, and one of the things that we've done, one of the organizational principles of the Donovan Bank Foundation is, we got a lot of advice early on. It all sucked about scalability and monetization and all this other kind of stuff. And people always go, you ought to build this into something that the government can contract with you to do transition. And I'm like, no way, man. I'm not gonna be in a position where they can tell me what to do. I'm not going to be in a position where they can tell me what to say. I'm not going to be in a position where they can shut the door on us and then we can't deliver the services we want to deliver to people. So yeah, I am as independent from all of that, and I have no compunctions whatsoever. I think, for better or worse, I have a fairly well-established reputation for candor in and out of the organization. Yeah. So yeah, I don't need any. I don't need any. I don't need any grace to say what the fuck is on my mind most of the time.
So, what talked about this is I want to be a nonprofit. I'm glad that you ended up being a nonprofit, but it was like one of the things is they want you to have a board. You should have these advisors, and they want you a niche mission statement, and like you were just you basically blew my thinking process apart. You were like, send it, like apply for the paperwork. So I towards the end when we're talking about the Donovan Banks, we get through your career and stuff like that, and kind of like post service stuff that led you to become a part of that foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to kind of talk through that too as like a special thing, because like I think there's a lot of veterans. We talked about the hunting and fishing guys. Travel around. I told you I'm trying to work with that organization out of Kentucky for the interview and stuff like that. I think it'd be phenomenal trying to get that message out there. Kind of like say, hey, like you can do this shit too. Like become a 501. You know what I mean? Like, so that'd be great.
Yeah, look, man. We can talk about it later. We can talk about it now, but yeah, it's not hard to do. And look, a lot of veterans are interested in nonprofits because it appeals to their sense of service. Like pretty much everybody who joins the military has a calling to serve others. That's why you're there, and so that's why you see a lot of nonprofits popping up for a bunch of stuff. It's not just veteran service nonprofits. A lot of veterans start nonprofits that serve underprivileged kids or the homeless or the hungry, whatever it is. It doesn't. But veterans are definitely called to nonprofit service. I can talk and they get a lot of bad advice, most of it from lawyers, about how hard this is. It's all bullshit, man. We did it all. I'll tell you that story. I mean, we can talk about it now if you want. So look, we had, and I'll tell you the whole story of where the Donovan Bank Foundation came from. But we had an advisor early on, and he was a great guy, and he gave us some seed money to get started, which was great. And then he was going to help. He was going to have his team help us, and I waited for like a year, man. I waited for a year for these people to get their shit together. And it was always a lot of advice and it just went nowhere. And finally I was like, oh, the hell with this, man. I'm just going to do this myself. I don't have time to wait for this anymore. And so I did it. And I'm telling you, it's not a big deal. It really isn't. Like when people get discouraged from maybe starting a nonprofit, it's a relatively straightforward process. And I know a lot of idiots who started nonprofits, no problem, on their own. You know what I mean? You don't need a degree to do it. You sure as shit don't need a lawyer to do it. But anyway, yeah. So we can get into all that. How the history of Donovan Bank. When you're ready. Do that.
Well, it's your story, so how you want to tell it. I mean, I enjoy going through careers. I never force anybody to talk about anything they don't want to discuss or deployments or anything like that. If I introduce a topic and you like it, run with it. You know what I mean? So, if you want to pick up kind of where you were at on your first deployment and roll on through there, you can cut wherever you want to go.
Yeah,
cool with whatever,
again,
man.
it's funny because a huge part of what we preach in the Donovan Bank Foundation, and we'll talk about the different programs, but the Janus transition program, that's where we do all our seminars and workshops and all that kind of stuff. A huge part of what we try to make these guys understand is that, once you transition out, that's it. It's over now. You're not part of that thing anymore. So, I've spent, I've essentially have separated myself from my service so much. It's like, it is what it is. I mean, I can always talk about this deployment or that deployment. Look, I did 8 deployments total. Kosovo, 6 Afghanistan tours, and my last tour was as the task force commander in Syria. So most people don't remember the history of how Syria unfolded with ISIS and everything else, but as ISIS grew, um, you know, we had boots on the ground. We had 50 boots on the ground in Syria, because you got to remember, we were in Iraq, no problem. Syria was a sovereign nation. We weren't invited there. I mean, we were there they just kind of looking the other way because they owned the problems in Damascus, so we were up in the northeast part of the country dealing with ISIS there, partnering with the Kurds, all that kind of stuff. So technically, the U.S. government had authorized 50 boots on the ground actually in Syria proper. In about 2016, they increased that to 300 boots on the ground. So my responsibility was to bring in the other 250 boots on the ground, so to speak. Because at that time, the 50 boots on the ground, I keep saying that, but it's like 50 people, that was all Delta Force guys. And it was they fell under an organization called TF9. So that was like the Delta Force headquarters was TF9 deployed. And, they were doing advise and assist with the Kurds against ISIS. Well, that kept growing, and they really needed to do Green Beret stuff. They really needed to build a force to contend with ISIS. And that's not really what Delta Force does. Their precision, their direct engagement. Look, it's not rocket science. People can figure things out. But obviously, if you have an institutional and organizational construct that that allows you to do that sort of thing, then that's who you want to do it. So they turned to SF Command and said, hey, listen, we want to get an SF group over here doing that kind of stuff. And so it was just timing, luck and timing. I happened to take command of 3rd Battalion, 5th Group at the time, and then we were the ones that got pegged to go and do that. So it was just good luck or bad luck, depending how you look at it. But that was my last deployment was in 2016 in Syria. So yeah, we could literally have a podcast series of that shit show. You know what I mean? My history of deployments in Afghanistan, because I was there as a team leader in a place called Deir Wood. I was there as an assistant operations officer at a battalion level. I was there as a headquarters company commander at battalion level. I was there as a jock, as a deputy J3, a deputy brigade level operations officer. I was there running the village stability operations at the headquarters level, which just means I manage the numbers and tracking and all that kind of stuff. So I did a lot in Afghanistan. Spent a lot of time there, right? Had a lot of personal experience and insights. But it's a long history. You know what I mean? But yeah, I almost wrote a book about it called The Jester's War, because it was just it was a series of comedies of errors for the most part. Everybody always thinks that stuff is really it's really high end and precise, and it's no, man, not at all. So anyway, yeah. So but and I've done a lot of stuff, and I did a lot of stuff in the military too, right? So I commanded an SF company, but I didn't deploy with them in combat. I commanded an SF battalion. But my last job was as the deputy group commander of the Special Warfare Training Group. So the first Special Warfare Training Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, is where all Green Berets are assessed, selected, and trained. Every Green Beret who's ever walked the earth, with the exception of John Wayne and John Rambo, went through First Special Warfare Training Group. That's where it all happens, right? They fall under something called the Special Warfare Center and School. So the Special Warfare Center and School is all of SF training, and then First Training Group is where that's kind of that's basic training and advanced individual training for Green Berets. That's where all that, and then off to the groups they go. So my last job was as the deputy group commander for First Special Warfare Training. And my plan was, I was going to. So you mentioned at the beginning that I have two sons in high school. Actually, one of them is now graduate. One of them is a sophomore at NC State now, and the other one's going to be a senior in high school. And at that time, my wife and I decided that the most important thing was for my sons to be able to start and finish high school in the same place. That was really important to my wife. I was well, there's only one option. Then I got to get out. We've played this thing out as far as we can, because if I got promoted to 06, and I had been a battalion commander, so it was very likely that I would get promoted to 06, full colonel. If I got promoted to 06, then it was going to be 3 moves in 3 years. So I was like, no, we don't want that to happen. So step one is I submarined my official file by keeping my major's photo in there. So at the time, if your full colonel board comes up and they open, they're like, this guy's got a major's photo. He's not serious. That immediately takes you out of the run. That simple step was all it took for me to control my own fate, right? So that was step one, is to make sure I didn't get promoted. And then I was like, okay, so I got to retire, or else, we can't stay here. There's too much of a possibility that that will get moved. And so my plan was I was going to drop my paperwork in February of 2019, and I was going to walk out the door in February 2020. So in the fall of 2018, I started to prepare for that, and I had gotten some advice from a Marine, as a matter of fact, that I had served with in the NCTC, the National Counterterrorism Center up in DC. Gong show. The place is an absolute bureaucratic gong show. But I was there for about 6 months on a temporary duty thing, and I met a friend, Tim Stefanik, and he was a Marine 05, and he went through this course called the Tuck Next Step program at Dartmouth College. It's a 2-week transition program for veterans, or not veterans, but transitioning military and Olympic athletes. Which you're like, what the hell do those two things have in common? But it turns out that both of those groups are like really, really similar in terms of the fact that they were dedicated to a singular purpose for like almost their entire life, and then it was gone. So they had a lot of commonality. It works way better than you think it would at first blush. So he encouraged me to go to this program. So in the fall of 2018, I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply to the Tuck Next Step program, and then that will lead to my next opportunity, because that's what I thought transition was all about. So finding that next opportunity is all about the next job, right? So I applied for the program and I got accepted, and then I had to pay out of pocket like $1,500 or something. Really good deal at the time, because it covers everything. You're there for 2 weeks, it covers all your lodging, your food, everything. Right? It was a great deal. And so I applied, I got accepted, and like literally the week after I got accepted, one of my best friends got picked up to be the commander at training group. And he was like, hey, I want you to come be my deputy. I was like, oh, you know what? I won't PCS, I won't move, and I won't deploy, so that won't affect the boys' high school. Hey, okay, I'll just kick my retirement down the road 2 years. I'll retire 2 years from now. That's great. And then I thought, oh man, I just wasted this money, and I'm going to waste this leave going to this program, and then I'll go there, and maybe someone will be like, hey, we'd love to hire you, and I'm like, oh, I'm not getting out for 2 years, so it's going to be a totally squandered opportunity. But I was committed at that point. I was like, oh, fuck it, I'll just go, right? So I went. When I went, I realized that not only was I not starting transition too early, I was actually starting it too late. And so when I got to training group, I said, we need to start our own transition program. The only goal is to get guys started early. If I can just get them started early, 2 years instead of 1 year, that'll really give them a leg up. And so that's what we did. We started toying with this idea of a transition program. And at that same time, I met a guy who was transitioning himself, Drew Stamp. And Drew was at the time he was an E7, but he eventually got promoted to Master Sergeant. But he was getting ready to medically retire, because he'd been shot twice in Afghanistan. So he'd done a lot of work, and it was during COVID. So he'd done a lot of work in, figuring out transition and talking to nonprofits and all this other kind of stuff. And we met, just a total coincidence. He looked me up on LinkedIn, had no idea we worked in the same headquarters. No clue. But he was like, oh, this guy looks interesting. He's from Fayetteville. He couldn't really tell I was in the military. And he called me, or he emailed me and said, hey, I'd love to get together and, just meet. And I said, yeah, come over to my office in Bank Hall. He's like, Bank Hall? He's like, our Bank Hall? I was like, yeah. So he had no idea. We were working basically across the street from one another. So he came over and sat down, and within 15 minutes, I was like, oh, I got to have this guy run this program. So I sold my soul to a couple of sergeant majors to get this E7 transferred from the G3 shop at SWIC over to us as excess in special warfare training. But I pulled it off. And so Drew came over to work for me to build this program. And that's what we did. And we built this program. I went on leave. I was like, look, we got to come up with a name. It's got to have a brand. I went on leave, And I came back a week later, and they had named it the Janus program. They had like a little whiteboard session with a couple of dudes. I think it was a guy. I think it was this guy Will Cunningham, who was the Group S3 at the time. I think Will actually came up with the name Janus. And I came back. I was like, "What are you, crazy? Every soldier's going to call this J Anus. This isn't going to work." I was like, "This is a terrible idea." And I was like, "All right, whatever." So we stuck with Janus because Janus is the Roman god of transition. That's where the name came from. So we created the Janus program, but it was part of training group. It was an active duty training group program. And so we started talking to people, and at first we were just advising them kind of one-on-one, But then we realized, man, we're telling them the same thing over and over and over again. Maybe we should do like a workshop where we can talk to a bunch of people all at once. So we started doing that. And then somebody at 10th Group, a guy by the name of Ignacio Garza, he started a nonprofit called the Special Forces Foundation, mostly helping 10th Group out in Colorado, but but their charter is to help everybody in the regiment. But that's where they're from. And so he heard about what we were doing. He's like, "Listen, we're thinking about a transition program. Can you come out and tell us about, what you've learned?" And we're like, "Absolutely." So we went out there, we met with Ignacio, and he was like, "Hey, listen," he was like, "instead of us starting a program, can you just come out and do it?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure, we'll come out and do it." So we went out to 10th Group, and we did like a workshop, a Janus workshop. And then it just blew up from there. And every group started calling us, and we're like, "Hey, can you come do a workshop? Can you?" And so we kind of built it over time under this safety umbrella of active duty. And then, Drew was getting out. He was medically retiring, right? But he was like, "I'm going to put that off because if they'll just let me do this full time for now, I'll just do this until it's, while we get it built." So he extended, ended up getting promoted to E8, Master Sergeant. But of course, he was never going to go back to it. He wasn't going back to group. He was going to medically retire no matter what. But we started to see the barn door for both of us. Like, my retirement was set in stone. When my special warfare training group gig was up, I was definitely retiring then. There was no two ways about that. And Drew was definitely medically retired. And I told him, I said, "Look, man, I've been doing this a long time. If we leave this here, it will die. And it won't die because of malevolence or maliciousness. It'll die because of the passive indifference of bureaucracy. No one's going to be as passionate as we are. No one's going to have the expertise that we've built up over the last couple of years. So we should take this with us when we go." And that's what we did. So in 2021, while we were still on active duty, we incorporated as the Donovan Bank Foundation, because I knew I needed, and I'll tell you the story where that came from too. We needed an overarching umbrella, right? Because you needed room for other programs other than Janus, because I knew there would be other things that would be required. And so we created the Donovan Bank Foundation, and Janus program became our flagship program. And that was in 2021. We were both on active duty, and at that moment, the minute we were incorporated, not when we had our 501c3 status, but the minute we were incorporated in North Carolina, that's when I was like, "Okay, we can never accept another nickel from the government. We can't do this TDY, nothing. We got to do it out of our own pocket, because now we're an official thing," right? So even though we were still on active duty, we didn't use any government resources at that point, because I knew how that shit worked. And lo and behold, like 6 months later, somebody made an IG complaint against us, like, "Oh, these guys are doing like nonprofit work, using government money." And I'm like, "The fuck we are." I was like, "Here's the books, man." I was like, "I know better." So we got past that really quickly. But so we incorporated in 2021, and I didn't want to make the Janus Foundation, so we created the Donovan Bank Foundation, and then we built it from there. I got out in May of 2022, and Drew got out in October of 2022. And we've been building it ever since. But where Donovan Bank came from, okay, so there's this whole other parallel story that goes along with it, right? So about that same, so around in 2019, I met a guy by the name of Pack, P-A-C-K, Pack Fancher. And Pack, I was at a networking event. Ironically, the same guy who I met at the NCTC, Tim, he runs these networking, these like socials in DC. And he's like, "Oh, you gotta come. I kept blowing it off. I was like, "Tim, I don't want to go folks." And so, but finally I went. And I went, they call it the Safe House. And it's just a networking event, really cool. And I met Pack at the Safe House event. And we got to talking, and Pack told me he had been an investment banker, and he got really sick of that. And he got sick with the whole gala scene, because it was always, they always throwing these galas, for networking, whatever. He really got sick of it. And he wanted to try something different when he was an investment banker. So he created this this kind of anti-gala event. And I don't think it was it called Spook Stock from the very beginning? Let's just say it was. And they called it Spook Stock, right? Because the idea was, like a play on words for Woodstock. He was going to have this like really, jeans and t-shirt rock show kind of event that drew in, companies that wanted to do business with the federal government and then federal government folks, right? And mostly at the time it was focused on the IC, the intelligence community, so the CIA, DIA, all these kind of things. So Pat created this thing called Spook Stock, and all Spook Stock did every year was they ran this music event. I think the first one was Dan Aykroyd. Back when he was like doing this like offshoot from the Blues Brothers kind of thing. And they made money. Like the first one that he did, they made money, and they were like, well, we can't keep it. We structured this as a 501c3 just to run it separate from the investment banking firm that he was from. And he's like, so we got to do something with this money. So he found, and I don't remember exactly how he fell into it, but he found the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. So for people who don't know, the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, they provide education benefits to Gold Star kids. So children of the fallen, particular to special operations, they help fund their college aspirations. That's what they do. That's their whole thing. And Pat became really passionate about that, so he decided to, they would be their main beneficiary. And then that started to grow, right? So by the time I met him, I think he had been doing it for, I want to say 9 or 10 years. He had been running it, and they had been, every year they've been giving a little bit more money, because all their proceeds, minus what it costs, for his salary and to run the whole thing, and one other gal who's running it with him. And then they would donate the rest to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. And at the time, I think they became like the second largest, like independent, like corporate type donor to Special Operations Warrior Foundation. I think at their height, they probably donated like $500,000 or maybe a little bit more. It's probably a little bit more. So anyway, so I met him, and he was telling me all about this thing, Spook Stock, and what they do, and it's for Gold Star kids. I'm like, that's awesome, man. I was like, yeah, my wife and I would love to go. We'd love to, because for government folks, what they call govies, if you're a private citizen, you pay like I think $1,000 to go to this private concert. But for government folks, it's like $100. So like, my wife and I will definitely go. Love to support it. Thanks so much. We talked for whatever, I was talking, whatever the fuck I was talking. You put a nickel in me, obviously I will stop, right? So we got to talking. So, and that was that. And I thought, okay, great. We'll get an invite, and Christine and I can go see the show. I think at the time, the concert that was coming up might have been the Lenny Kravitz show. So like, yeah, cool. My wife and I'll go. About a month later, I get a phone call from Pat. He's like, hey, listen. He's like, I've been trying to do this other thing for a couple of years, and it just hasn't worked out really well. I've been trying to do this like close quarters battle experience to try and like attract big donors, He's like, I tried it once, it didn't really work out. And he contracted with like a training company, it kind of didn't work out. So he's trying, I think this might have been the second or third time he was trying it. And he was contracting with a company in West Virginia. At the time, it was called Summit Point. It was actually called BSR, Bill Scott Racing, I think was the name of it. Anyway, they do tactical training. You can find a lot of those places, but they do that kind of stuff. And so he was just contracting with them, was going to break through. And he's like, I'd really love to, because of what we do, I'd love to have special operators there. He's like, do you think you could help me recruit some special operators to volunteer? I was like, yeah, what did you, of course. I was like, what did you have in mind? He said, well, I thought, in these CQB lanes, in these close quarter battle lanes, they could be the OPFOR. And I was like, listen, man, I can get you Green Berets, 20 years of combat experience that'll shoot CEOs in the face all day long and have a ball. I said, but I don't think that'll endear them to your cause. I said, why don't we try this? I said, I'll bring in special operations volunteers, and they'll be like advisors to to these groups of CEOs and venture capitalists and captains of industries. Oh my God, that's a great idea. Do you think we can do that? I was like, yeah. And I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll go one further. I said, I'd be happy to volunteer to run this thing for you if you would allow me. I was like, I'm good at this stuff. I was the chief of training at SF Command. I was the G37. I mean, I understand how to put together training events. I was like, I would love to do that. I'd love to help you out in that way. was like, oh, that would be great. So that's what I did. So I volunteered to run the special operations experience for him. He was calling it the CQB thing, but eventually it became the special operations experience. And so the very first one we did was in West Virginia, and it was mostly run by these other guys. And they're awesome. The BSR guys. Now they're called Summit Point, whatever. They still do the same kind of thing, and they're really good dudes. And I got up there a couple days early. I was like, okay, well, why don't we add this and try this? And all they were going to do was just some basic marksmanship and then some CQB stuff. But I added like some driving in there and some combative, some hand to hand. And so we ran it, and it went over like gangbusters. It was like the best one he had ever done. He's like, this is how we need to do it. I'd love for you to come do this for us, full time. I said, well, I'm still on active duty, but I'll do it as a volunteer until maybe, I can do it for you full time. And so I started doing it for him as a volunteer. And about after we had done one, or maybe we had done two, he was like, yeah, we need to kind of brand this thing. I want it to be, so Spook Stock, the deal with Spook Stock is like really secretive, right? They have no social media presence. If you go to their website, it's all password protected. You have to know somebody to get in, right? So it's the exclusivity of it is one of the appeals. And so PAC wanted the special operations experience to be the secret thing within the secret thing, And I remember again, talking about how I have a shitty memory, but there are certain things that I remember. I was sitting in the parking lot of a bicycle shop in Fayetteville. We were all on the phone, me, PAC, and this girl Lori, who at the time was this operations guy. And we're trying to come up with some names. It's like, God, it needs to be benign, so no one would know what it is if they heard about it, but they might hear about it and want to know more. And so I don't remember exactly. Maybe I iterated it a couple of times, and I was like, oh, it should be the Donovan Bank Society. They're like, yeah, perfect. That'd be great. At the time, he didn't really know who Aaron Bank was. So Wild Bill Donovan was, he founded the OSS in World War II, and then went on to found the CIA. And then Aaron Bank was in the OSS. He was a Jedburgh in World War II, and then went on to found the Green Berets. I'm like, perfect, man. You're trying to serve the IC and special operations. There you go, Donovan and Bank, right? So it's going to be the Donovan and Bank Society was the secret thing. So we did the special operations experience as the Donovan and Bank Society. Kept building it. I built a whole brand and like a whole branding tableau, and it was like this oldie time kind of imagery and logo, all this kind of stuff, right? And so we did that. We did it a few times as the Donovan and Bank Society, and then eventually, I think I want to say in 2000 and maybe 20. Yeah, right around 2000, sometime in 2020, the Spook Stock board got a little nervous. You know what I mean? Because they got some lawyers on there, and they're a very traditional board, right? It's a big board, a lot of oversight, and they got nervous because I'm flying guys in OH-6 helicopters. They're handling explosives. They're getting bit by dogs. I mean, we're doing it all, man, right? And so they got panicky about it. I say panicky. That's probably not a fair characterization, but they were like, "This is probably too much risk for what we've built. We don't want to put this entire organization at risk." But the reality was, I'm like, dude, you are at more risk on a ski trip to Vail than you are here because of our level of professionalism and expertise. It's designed to look really, really dodgy, but it's very, very, very safe, right? Anyway, they decided to get out of the special operations experience business. They were like, we don't want to do this anymore. And so Pat kind of had, I think he was a little nervous. Because Pat and I spent a lot of time together. We traveled a lot, recruiting, trying to pitch this thing to people, trying to get people to come to it, all this kind of stuff. So I think he was kind of nervous to tell me. But essentially, he was like, hey, we're not going to do this thing. I was like, you firing me? Kind of half joking. I was like, it's cool, man. Don't worry. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I said, I'll always be a volunteer. I'll always be, no big deal. So anyway, so that put the Donovan and Bank Society on a shelf. Well, that all happened a couple of months before we were getting ready to incorporate, right? And so right at that, like all of this stuff came together. That's what I tell people all the time. Like, look, man. So the third member of our team, Stu, we'll talk about him in a minute. Stu is very fond of saying, and he stole this from someone else, but obviously, we believe in it very strongly, is that culture eats strategy for lunch, right? Strategy is mostly bullshit. all these grand plans and schemes, all this kind of stuff. And I tell people all the time, look, man, just keep your eyes and ears open. You never know how things are going to manifest. But if you're watching for them, instead of being stuck in this fucking plan that you think you have, but you're just, kind of watching for things to develop and seeing where opportunities might come from, you just never know what might manifest. And so it all just kind of came together at the same time. I'm like, oh, we need a nonprofit brand. Donovan Bank is already kind of established with special operators because of all the volunteers that we had gotten over the years. I was like, why don't we pull that bitch off the shelf and and that'll become our thing. And so that's what we did. And so we incorporated it as the Donovan Bank Foundation. That's where it came from. And it turned out, it was just a miraculous coincidence, because not only do we already have the brand recognition and an established structure and all this other kind of stuff, but it turns out that the ethos of Donovan Bank, the men, was emblematic of how we wanted to run this organization. Because when they stood up the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and predecessor to SOCOM and all the other kinds of things, they sought men and women back then, because they recruited both. They sought people who were capable of calculated recklessness with disciplined daring. And that's how we run the Donovan Bank Foundation. We have a very small board of directors. There's a chairman of the board and two additional directors. We have a board of advisors, but they're a fundraising instrument. And of course, they give us all kind of advice on that stuff, but they're not a governing body, right? And the organization is 3 people, 3 full-time people that run this organization and do all of the work. Not all of the work, but we contract out to do a lot of stuff. All Green Berets, and I am 99.9% sure we are the last special forces focused nonprofit benevolent organization that is still comprised entirely of special operators. We're unique in the space because a lot of them have grown to the point where they bring in experts in running a nonprofit, but no military service, stuff like that, right? I get it. I understand how things evolve that way. What's that?
Saying it's hard to manage a scale like that. You have to when
Sure,
you start taking $10-15 million in a year, and you
Right.
got it's just too much to manage with somebody who doesn't specialize it.
100%. So you need that level of expertise. I do understand it. But we very specifically have committed to staying small so that we can stay incredibly agile and responsive, and we don't have to slam the door in anybody's face. Our organizational values in the Donovan Bank Foundation are toughness, audacity, love, stewardship, humor, and abundance. And the theory behind abundance is that, one, we give away everything that we have. Anybody can have our intellectual property, take it all. You want to take our presentations, any of it. It doesn't matter, because if somebody can do it better than we're doing it, that means that the community is just being served better. No problem. The flip side to abundance is anybody that finds our way to our doors will try and help. So yes, we are focused exclusively on soft, because that's who we are and that's who we connect with and that's who we understand. And we understand the nuanced requirements that they need to transition successfully. But we had the Fort Bragg chaplain come to one of our events. I did not know she was the Fort Bragg chaplain before I dropped like at least half a dozen F-bombs in the presentation. And I was like, sorry, chaplain. She's like, no, it's all good. But we get, we get Marines. We had a kid from the conventional, he was a conventional Army HHC commander. He was an artillery guy. It doesn't matter. Like some of this, we embrace this idea of abundance. Anybody that can find their way to us. We literally got an email. You get some crazy email. You have a website set up, right? No website. Okay, so you might not need one, but when you do, the one thing I would tell you don't bother with a contact form. Don't bother with this is reach us here. You get the craziest shit through that thing. It's insane. Probably 50% of what we get is people trying to glom onto our success. Like, I bet every week I get an email from some law firms, representing veterans in their claims against, um, what's the whole, not contaminated water thing at Lejeune, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was the 80s, the 60s to 80s, I think,
Yeah.
is what they did that in. And then now they have the whole burn pit registry thing, the Pact.
Sure.
They rebranded it. The VA
There's
did.
all kinds of things,
Oh,
right?
this won't be out beforehand, but as of Monday of next week, if you don't register for the burn pit registry at the Pact, it's called the something Asians, blah blah blah. If you were exposed to chemical toxins,
Yeah.
literally Monday morning, the VA is not accepting any more claims for that. It's like 3 decades of, you know what I mean? Like,
No, but here's the deal.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but here's the deal, right? So part of what we, so, part of what we discuss in Janus. So the Janus program is broken up into like Janus 101. That's our big one. We do all that. It's a full day seminar on the successful pillars of transition. How do you plan for it? What are the things you need to do? And we talk about how to file a VA claim and the benefits delivery discharge program and doing that 180 days before you get out, all that kind of stuff, right? But what we're also telling is we have really good partnerships with the folks who actually do that stuff. And what they'll all tell you is that the PACT Act has nearly broken the system because now, look, the VA claims process is managed by the VA, which is limited by the number of people that they have, period. It's physics, man. There is no AI. It's human beings have to deal with that shit, right? They have like millions of new claims, millions. And so the whole system is wildly overwhelmed. So I'm not surprised if they're like, all right, we got to put us, we got to pump the brakes. They might have to come back later and be like, okay, now you can start resubmitting claims. But whatever backlog they have was exacerbated tenfold by the passing of the PACT Act.
I wasn't trying to rag on the VA for closing it out. I'm just saying they didn't brand it correctly because there's a lot of people that don't know that's a thing, and they closed it out. And let's say a dude who got out 10 years ago was burning shit in fucking Afghanistan, Iraq, and now he's developed some kind of fucking cancer that was from that. You know what I mean? Or it's just some kind of exposure. He can't even apply. And let's say he only has a 20% disability rating. Something ridiculous. And now he can't get healthcare for the VA to get those cancer treatments or whatever. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just a big fucking deal.
Yeah, it's I mean, we can talk VA stuff too because and veteran entitlement, all that kind of stuff. Because the VA gets a bad rap. But at the end of the day, look, I know a guy by the name of Tom Allen. And Tom, he's a professor emeritus at Duke now. Really interesting dude. But he was Obama's chief veteran experience officer, and he was behind the initiative to revamp all of that shit. And so, it's not really fair to be like, listen, yeah, your experience sucks, but you should have seen what it was like 10 years ago. That's not a really fair characterization, but it's come a long way. Interesting thing about Tom Allen, though, he grew up in the fast food industry, and he was the president of McDonald's for all of Europe, and coined the term Royale with cheese. You remember? Yeah. You're younger than I am, so some people don't remember. The Pulp Fiction reference, that whole dialogue about Royale with cheese. He came up with it. Anyway, they've done a lot to overhaul that system. And again, it's not perfect. But if it's not bad either. It gets a bad rap. And it gets a bad rap by people who, I don't know, they think the world should be delivered to them on a fucking silver platter, and it doesn't work like that, Look, every veteran, for the most part now, with the exception of the guys that were drafted for Vietnam, who are still veterans and they're still alive, everybody else volunteered. You chose to be there, man. And veteran entitlement is a very, very, very slippery slope, and it is being exacerbated by society. So sometime very shortly after 9/11, it became sacrosanct to criticize a veteran. Like, if you want on board with the thank you for your service mentality, you better keep your mouth shut. But that's gone too far now, in my opinion, right? And so one of the things we talk to guys about as they transition out is, is not falling into this veteran as a victim mentality, because it's all out there. You can become a professional veteran and people will throw shit at you all day long. Free trips, free this, free that. Hey, look, that's all well and good. I saw something online, literally, I think within the last 24 hours, which was great. And I'm going to steal it and we're going to incorporate it into Janice. That talked about the kind of the pathway of of what happens when you get a lot of free stuff. And the way the guy characterized it was, the first time you get something for free, it creates appreciation. The second time you get something for free, it creates anticipation. The third time that you get something for free, it creates expectations. And the fourth time you get something for free, it creates entitlement. And the fifth time, it creates dependency. And so, we have a lot of, absent advice to the contrary, we have a lot of guys that will, when they get out, think the world owes them everything. For fucking what? You volunteered to be here. You led a remarkable life of extraordinary purpose and meaning. You had an identity that was given to you. You didn't have to build it. You didn't have to buy it. You didn't have to find it. It was provided for you and became, in most cases, inexorably part of who you were, because it was provided for you when you were at a very formidable time in a very impressionable time in your life, right? And it gave you a community unmatched anywhere else. There's no other place where you could walk into a room. If you and I were in a room on active duty when you were a Marine and I was an Army, Green Beret, and we could look at each other and know that if the shit goes sideways, I'll give my life for you and you'll give your life for me. You're not going to find that anywhere else, right? So you had this extraordinary gift of service. And now you think what? The world owes you something for that? They already gave you something for it, right? So yes, there are many, many, many benefits available to you. And by God, you should take advantage of them, because, you have earned some of those things. But to believe that everything should be delivered to you and you're in this entitlement mentality, we work very hard to break that, because it's incredibly unhealthy. It goes nowhere fast. And the people that we see struggle the most are the guys who just were ill prepared for the loss of purpose, identity, and community. I mean, that's the foundation of our program. And I should say, just structurally, so people kind of understand it, that the Donovan Bank Foundation has essentially 4 programs that we use to accomplish our mission. The Janice program, which I've talked about already in some depth, that's where all of our transition work occurs. Our workshops, our seminars, our leadership education, our one-on-one counseling. We do that all through the Janice program. We're at every SF base twice a year. We're in Germany once a year, Japan once a year, because we have 4 deployed battalions in SF there. And nobody gives a shit about those guys. And so we try to go out and see them. We're at all the special forces satellite locations like Yuma, Arizona, Key West, Florida, Fort Bliss, Fort Polk, Fort Irwin. No, they're backwaters, but there's SF guys there too. So the Janice transition program, that's where most of our time, energy, and resources are dedicated. We have the special operations experience. We inherited that essentially from Spookstock. We were like, I'll do it. I was like, you don't want to do it anymore? We got it. And we take it, and we do that twice a year. It's our semi-annual fundraiser, but it's also a program, because the SF volunteers, the soft volunteers that come to that to be advisors or role players or OPFOR or instructors, they all get exposed to opportunities and people and networking that they couldn't normally have access to. So it's both a fundraiser and a program. We have a wellness program, the Innovative Wellness Program, and that's where we help guys get access to cutting edge treatment for PTS and TBI. We'll talk about that in depth here in a minute. We've sent hundreds of people through that program now. We partner with 2 world-leading experts in a procedure called the stellate ganglion block procedure. One's a guy by the name of Dr. Eugene Lipoff in Chicago, Illinois, and another guy, Dr. Sean Mulvaney in Annapolis, Maryland. They know each other really well, those 2 guys. Doctors are funny, you know what I mean? There's a lot of ego involved in medicine, so they both claim like ownership of like inventing this innovation of the treatment, but that's between them. And that's the Innovative Wellness Program, and then we actually have something called the Donovan Bank Society, which is a holdover from the naming is a holdover from what We used to call it Special Operations Experience. And the society are these little chapters around the country where there are 3 private sector folks who are accomplished. They have to have have done really well in business, or they have to be, have a lot of philanthropic accomplishments, whatever. They're accomplished people, right? And 3 to 9 soft veterans. And so these little, there's these little chapters, and they're required to get together 4 times a year, face to face, and then they're required to host like 2 events. It can be anything. It just depends on what the chapter likes to do. They could go golfing, they could go fishing, they could do service projects in the community, whatever. It doesn't matter. But we're building these chapters around the country, and that's the Donovan Bank Society. So those are the 4 programs, that we have. But obviously, the Janus Transition Program is our big one.
Yeah. Before you're going to go a little bit deeper into the wellness program. I was curious about that. I know the Janus program's awesome. I mean, I posted all the links the other day. I don't know if I do a fantastic job at broadcasting things, but I'm sure some people saw it and checked it out. Hopefully, anyways.
Yeah.
I just, even if someone just comes in there and say, "Hey, I want to be an ambassador, I want to sponsor," that'd be cool. Or if a dude who in the soft community didn't know about you guys, but it sounds like it's impossible, at least in
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
You'd be so surprised. So one of the pioneers in the unit level transition is Third Group. They have a program called the META program. META. It was started by a guy by the name of Jeff Dardia, who's a master sergeant. He's retiring this year. And Jeff's been doing this stuff for years and years and years and years. I talked to guys in Third Group who don't even know about it. I'm like, how do you not know about META? It's been there for years. So yeah, it's surprising to me, as hard as we try, even within the very closed community that we're part of, still people are just like, oh no, I don't know that. So yeah, I appreciate any effort to get the word out is valuable.
Yeah, so I told you before, I discovered you on Instagram like real, man. I was like, I literally wrote to a bot. Well, I thought it was going to be a bot. It was a nice lady named Kendra, I believe. And I was like, hey.
Oh, did you hit up Kendra?
Well, I just messaged on IG, and I was like, hey, dude, like, I don't know who this is to whom it concerns. Please put me in touch with the founders. Yeah. Like, I want to get in touch with you guys. Worst case scenario is you say no. Your best case scenario is you say yes, and I get to interview you, and the foundation gets to grow or it gets more exposure, which is one of the principles inside of this thing is to help out, people and educate people, give people the opportunities to view different aspects that are around the country. Obviously, in North Carolina, you'll be my North Carolina. I'll probably do it. If there's another person in North Carolina who wants to get interviewed, let me know. All right.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, technically, the business owner in North Carolina that I may interview is out of Missouri. They live there, so I'm going to say that's Missouri, but I may do another Missouri. You never know how it works out. But I looked at your IG and I went to your pages and I was like, oh yeah, these dudes are doing good work, and here's the thing, I said it a minute ago, and as you said, the same thing. People get entitled. Once you make it to a certain level too in organizations or in a rank, you get the sense that the world is your oyster and you can eat as much as you want, right? And that you don't have to work anymore, and once you get to that kind of mindset, which happens at the higher levels of military and any organization out there, that's just like the same thing. Bankers get bailed out, CEOs get bonuses when they have to lay off people. You don't want that kind of mentality because then you become an awful fucking person and no one wants to deal with you. No one wants to hire you. And then, I don't surround myself with those type of people, and I try to tell people that are like that, like, hey man, you're taking the wrong aspect. You're taking the wrong roadway. You're going to end up very, very unhappy and very, very unsuccessful. And if you are successful, you're going to be miserable because no one's going to be around you.
Yeah.
You're going to create a foundation that's built on bullshit, and that's the wrong way to go into life, especially out of service where you have no backers. Like, you're forced to have relationships in service. I think the best thing people don't understand is you're taking networks and relationships that are going to be there forever. Like, you're going to have all, especially in the special operations community, you're working with the alphabet agencies every day. You know what I mean? Well, especially when you're deployed, you charge of affairs, regional, offices, consulates, you're talking about partner nation forces. I talked about it a little bit. First time I actually really talked about special operations a little bit was the last podcast. And this one, obviously, we're really deep in getting kind of deeper into it. We didn't talk about the soft truths or any of that stuff. We didn't break down the foundation of what special operations is, but like, people get the grasp that the people that are in this organization, one, the term pipe hitter. You motherfuckers are pipe hitters. You guys are out here. You did great work throughout every single theater, every single war since like 19, what is it, the Raiders and all this, 18 to go to the war. You know what I mean? Like, that's how long the lineage is. You're talking about 100 years. And the guerrilla warfare, unconventional warfare has been going on forever. You know what I mean? But the real work gets done when you're talking about your State Department authorizations and stuff like that, where you're on 5-year plans, 10-year plans. You're developing these partners and doing all these great things. So when I see somebody like you who's still selflessly sacrificing their time and effort to build organizational values that can be passed on to help people transition and give people the opportunity to be educated, special operation experience, or just now coming on there and trying to share the messages like, hey, we're out here. We want to grow. We're trying to help as many people. We're trying to stay small because we want to be organic. You know what I mean? Because you can't be organic. When you get too big, you can't be organic. It's very hard. And that's what you kind of spoke to about the other organizations who had to go ahead and switch out board members and stuff like that. And, executives, and which is good, as long as you're still out there doing good work and you're not like, we talked about the website nonprofits that don't actually do shit. You know what I mean? So
we pride ourselves on, on being action oriented. You know what I mean? Like, we do shit. So I said that, that's why, I like what you're doing, because like you're doing it. You're not, you know what I mean? I'm not saying that. Look, when we did our podcast, we did it remotely because we didn't, what the hell? We didn't have the time or energy or, the bandwidth to go out and do it remotely. Experimented with maybe trying it, but that didn't work because we just didn't have the time. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the, we try to explain to guys as they're transitioning out. Right? One of the pitfalls that they are drawn into as a result of the advice that they get from institutional transition systems and programs is this notion of like figuring out like how to transfer your skills and all that other kind of stuff. And we're like, that is a fool's errand. Nobody gives a shit about your skills. Nobody cares that you know how to run a jump. Nobody cares that you can, run a range, or that you can, shoot people. None of that stuff matters. Even the things that, people think are highly transferable, like a planner and all this other kind of stuff. At the end of the day, companies hire people, good ones, with some exceptions, based on their attributes, right? And so that's what we always tell these guys, is that they bring something to the marketplace that's like gold, and that's these attributes: energy, a bias for action. They do what they say they're going to do. Remarkable. They can solve complex problems with very little guidance or resources, and they're highly adaptable. Those are the things. And so I mention that because among those attributes is a bias for action. People who do things, and like we were talking about before, there are, by some estimates, I think 50,000 veteran service organizations in this country. Yeah, I mean, 99% of statistics are made up on the spot, right? But you know what I mean? It's like there's a lot, and most of them are full of shit. Most of them are just website deep, with a lot of donate buttons, and they'll cobble together, enough donations to provide a bunch of veterans with something, that's not really well thought out. It doesn't have it's again, and that's more about. So when we can get into the innovative wellness program. Early on in the innovative wellness program, one of the things that Spookstock still does for us is we have kind of like an open-ended grant with them that they help cover costs for treatment. So it's really great. It ends up being a lot of money. And so, one of the things that I argued with PAC about early on was the importance of making sure that you don't cover everything, right? So we cover a treatment, we cover lodging if you have to go to Chicago, but my argument was always we shouldn't cover travel. Like, you have to have some skin in the game. You know what I mean? And that's how you prevent this notion of entitlement. Anyway, so, but what I figured out was when someone comes to me, right, through the Innovative Wellness Program, Stu runs it for us, but I'm just making a point, and you're able to give them hope, and you deliver, you're like, hey, it's going to be taken care of, and we can cover this, we can cover this, we can cover this. there's brain chemistry involved in that. That makes that feel really good. It feels good to help other people, right? There's a release of dopamine when I can help you, and you like break down in tears because I've told you that there's hope for you. You don't have to suffer like this anymore. That's more about me than it is about you. And so it's really dangerous for organizations that don't appreciate that, because they give a veteran everything because it feels really good. Of course it feels good, but you're not looking at the long-term impact of that. Because I promise you, if you keep doing that, you're creating an entitled asshole who's gonna ultimately, if you follow that 5-step program, is gonna become dependent on the benevolence of others. That's not what veterans thrive on, right? We have a new program we're creating. I haven't figured out the name of it yet, but it's going to be one of our first fees for service. And the idea is we're going to corporations and basically telling them your veteran recruiting sucks. And the reason that it sucks is because you're trying to figure out, how do you accommodate veterans? How do you attract veterans by making them feel welcome? We're like, that's bullshit. You'll get veterans, you get the shitty veterans. If you want the veterans that come to you with the attributes and qualities that you think they come to you with, then you need to challenge them, not accommodate them, because that's what veterans thrive. They thrive on meeting challenges. So, to continue to create this entitlement and to give them everything, you feel good doing that, but you're doing more damage than you are good, in my opinion. So all of our programs have an element of, you have to own this. Like, we'll give you all the information that you could possibly need to successfully transition, but at some point, you've got to do it. We don't do it for you, So everything we do has an element of, ownership by the individual. That's what we feel, that is kind of an unspoken pillar of successful transition.
Yeah, I mean, the Marine Corps, they got the transition assistance program. You got to go through it. I'm sure every branch does now, because Congress made a requirement.
Correct. It's
yeah.
a congressional mandate.
Yeah. So, but those programs are pretty good. I don't think they do enough. I don't think they have enough time to really get set stone. But can I make it through my thought on this one? But they give you the tools for success. They show you the avenues to potentially take, and which is good. But what happens is people take that and they don't apply it because they're 6 months out or a year out, and then they forget about the information that they received, and they, or if they do apply it, they do well. But that's the thing, is people receive the information and they just put it one ear out the other because they're active duty. They don't think about it at all. So like, these programs are good that are out there. Like, I'm sure the Janus program, you're tailoring to dudes that are now hopefully 2 years out, right? That's the theory, but they have to recall the information and continue to progress themselves. So like, I think that with you saying that, in that mindset, is like, you have to take what we gave you, and if you don't apply it, we're not giving you everything. We're not hiring you. You said it yourself to me. You said, we're not job placement.
Right.
We're thought process placement. We're philosophy. Mindset. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't take these avenues after we give you the information, it's not like we're not going to be there for you, but I'm not giving you my paycheck. I can't hire you to do every job. I'm not the owner of that business you want to work for. I can't take the information that I give you and apply it. You know what I mean? So I love that mentality.
The number one impediment to successful transition is the individual. Because at some point, they are going to have to be their own advocate. They are going to have to go in. Number one, they're going to have to acknowledge that they don't matter to the system anymore. That is a bitter pill to swallow, right? But it's true. You don't fucking matter to the system. Not that your contributions haven't mattered, not that the relationships that you built don't matter, not that the things you accomplished don't matter. None of that. That's not what I'm talking about. But your contribution, the system is not designed to care about you in that way. Because if it was, the system would have failed 248 years ago. It's not designed to be dependent on the contributions of one individual. You have to accept that, right? And the example I always use in the Janus seminar is, I was the deputy commander of a group, right? So in other parlance, basically a deputy brigade commander. If I got hit by a bus on Friday, on Monday, do you know what they would say when people showed up? They'd be like, "Oh, Toolan, that's a shame. He was a nice guy. who do I talk to about getting these DA 638 signed? I got to get these done today. Is that the XO? It's, you know what I mean? That's the reality, man. So people have to accept that. And then, but in order to affect that, they've got to go in to the person who depends on them. They have to fight through their core values of duty, selfless service, loyalty, all these things upon which their entire identity and career has been built. And now they have to say, well, I got to take care of myself. So now they got to go in to that person who depends on them and say, hey, listen, boss, I got it. I know you want me to be involved. I can't do that project because I'm getting out. That is a really, 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 that is the one obstacle that people struggle with more than anything else. Because if you don't do that, then you can't, you've got to advocate for yourself, right? But to go back real quick about the transition assistance program, right? It is a congressionally mandated program, and people who are involved in transition need to understand a few things about it. You know, as a congressionally mandated program, its one and only outcome, its measurable metric is veteran unemployment. It was designed to reduce veteran unemployment. That's not for any noble reason. That's for the same reason as every other big congressional or big government program. It's a dollars and cents calculation. Because if you get out and you're a veteran and you collect unemployment, you know who pays that bill? The DOD. The Department of Labor turns around and says, oh, here's all the unemployed veterans. This is what it costs for their unemployment insurance. Here's the bill. So that was designed to lower that. And to be fair, it's worked. Veteran unemployment is lower for the last 19 months, 20 months. Veteran unemployment has been lower than civilian unemployment. So it clearly works. But you got to remember, only 14% of the military make a full 20-year career. Most people think it's a lot more than that because when you're in there for 20 years and you're getting out, you're surrounded by other people who are getting out. So it's like, isn't it all of us? No, man. It's like between like 12 and 15%, something like that. So the transition assistance program is designed to meet the needs of the 250,000 folks who get out every year in the rank of specialist to staff sergeant with 3 to 5 to 7 years of service. It's not designed to meet the nuanced requirements of 20 years, someone who's spent 20 years in SOF, right? So for what it is, yes, it's not a terrible program. It's like everything else. You get out of it what you put into it. It's hamstrung somewhat by the fact that it's run by people who've never really transitioned themselves, right? So that's the challenge. That's why units struggle. You can't have a green suitor running a transition program. I mean, they can coordinate it, they can advocate. They can't run it because they don't know shit about transition. They've never transitioned. You know what I mean? It's not a thing that they have expertise in. So the transition assistance program, you have to see it for what it is. Hey, real quick, you want to pause for 1 second? I just want to.
All right, everybody, we are back.
Lunch break.
Lunch break. Wow,
Well, Jordan wandered around my neighborhood trying to find. So there's like literally a Chick-fil-A within a stone's throw. But yeah, you ended up going the other way. So.
All right. So everyone knows Paul's a busy man. He has some ventures that he's looking into. So he'll put that out on his own terms. All right, so we were at transition assistance. We got back on topic. What the next thing I want to talk about, obviously, in the green room, is the wellness program.
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you how that evolved, what it's evolved to now. So essentially, the wellness program, ironically or not ironically, remember I told you the story about my decision to stay in for an extra 2 years was because one of my best friends, got picked up to be the training group commander. So this is a guy, Stu Ferris. And Stu and I followed Stu around to a lot of places, right? So he was in something, we were both in third group for a long time together. And then we were both, in the operations section in third group. And then we were both at the Commander's Initiative Group at United States Army Special Operations. We've done a lot of stuff like right one behind the other, right? Sometimes we did it together. Most of the time I was right behind him. Anyway, Stu was the guy who asked me to come be his deputy. And that was right after I had been his deputy when he was the chief of operations at SF Command. We good? Yeah. When he was the chief of operations at SF Command. And anyway, now Stu works for me. So Stu is the director of innovative wellness, right? And he's really expanded that program. But how it started was when we were, our mission statement. If I haven't said it already, I'd be shocked, but I'll reiterate it. Our mission statement at the Donovan Bank Foundation is to help special operators bring closure to their warrior story and transition to a life of peace, contentment, and balance, right? And that's all we designed that very deliberately. And we started to recognize that, some folks were dealing with the psychological and physiological wear and tear of 20 years in special operations that would potentially be an impediment to their achieving peace, contentment, and balance. Right. So we started to kind of get more involved in some of that stuff. And when I was on active duty, I actually, through a series of connections, because you never know where a connection might lead, right, got introduced to this guy, Dr. Eugene Lipoff. And Lipoff was a pioneer, along with this other guy, Mulvaney, who I mentioned, Dr. Sean Mulvaney, was a pioneer in a procedure called the stellate ganglion block. Now, the stellate ganglion block has been around for about 100 years for pain management. And what it is, well, let me talk about the symptoms first, and then I'll talk about the STD. So, we started to see that people were having these other challenges that they had to deal with, and one of them was there was this particular cluster of symptoms that a lot of people tended to manifest, and it was feelings of anxiety, having a hair trigger, so flying off the handle over little things. Insomnia was a big one. Irritability, sexual dysfunction. So this cluster of symptoms, when they would, if they would go and talk to somebody about them, the system would tell them, "Oh, you have PTSD," and that was it. And so it's like in SSI or blockers or all these medication, all these other kind of things. But it turns out that those symptoms were actually typically indicators of something else, which is very common in special operations, an overstimulated sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so what happens when you are, so the sympathetic nervous system, that's your flight or fight mechanism, right? Sympathetic and parasympathetic. And the way the flight or fight mechanism works is everybody understands. You're walking along, you're in the woods, and a snake crosses in front of your path. We're all full of shit. We're saying we're snake eaters, won't eat it. No, we won't. You jump back, you know what I mean? Your heart races, your eyes become much more focused, your ears become in tune, you sweat. That's your flight or fight mechanism defending you. It is millions of years of evolution helping you to react faster than you could cognitively. Everybody understands how fight or flight works, right? Maybe not exactly where it resides in the amygdala and all that other kind of stuff. But so essentially that's your flight or fight mechanism. However, when you are exposed to either chronic or acute stress, so chronic stress is, back-to-back 6-month deployments, or acute stress is, your best friend gets killed right next to you, or you accidentally kill a woman or a child in combat, right? When those things occur, many times the flight or fight mechanism, the sympathetic nervous system, gets stuck in overdrive. Because normally when you react to something, about 30 minutes later, everything calms down, right? You get back to baseline. But when you're exposed to chronic or acute stress, then your sympathetic nervous system never comes back down to baseline. And so the way that manifests, the way that feels is, you're in the kitchen, right, making a sandwich. You logically and cognitively know there's no threat there. You're just making a sandwich. But you open up that one cabinet and all the Tupperware comes spilling out, and you just get pissed. It makes you angry. That's not normal. That's because your sympathetic nervous system is still acting like there's a threat and responding to threats, even though you know there is no threat, right? So that's not normal. Okay. The good news is that there's a nerve mass in both sides of your neck called the stellate ganglion nerve mass, and it's connected directly to the amygdala, which is where the flight or fight mechanism resides. So it's often called, they talk about PTS as like this invisible injury. Not in this case. If you get the right kind of scan, you can actually see it. You can't get it with a regular MRI, and you can't get it with an X-ray. It has to be like a functional MRI or something called a SPECT scan. And what you can see with those is if you look at the amygdala, it's glowing, which means there's blood flow there when it shouldn't be, right? And so what happens is with the stellate ganglion block, they inject a small amount of anesthesia into the stellate nerve mass, the stellate ganglion, and it resets the amygdala to pre-trauma state. So guys get relief from all these symptoms they told were a disorder, which are actually a physical injury to the brain that with the right kind of scan you can see. So learned about that because I met Dr. Lipoff. We built a friendship and a relationship. We've now known each other for, Jesus, 5 years, now that I think about it. You know, what Lipoff did and Mulvaney is they innovated the SGP. So it used to be a single shot to the right side. And you can get a single shot to the right side in, you know, like military medicine, like Womack Army Hospital at Bragg. Some VAs even do it. But it doesn't last very long sometimes. It has about like maybe a 70% effectiveness rate. The innovation that, you know, Mulvaney and Lipoff came up with is something called the DSR, the dual sympathetic reset. So instead of a single shot to the C5 vertebrae, it's 2 shots, one to the C4. Well, they're not into the C4, but they bathe the C4 and the C6 vertebrae with this anesthesia. And then 24 hours later, they do it on the left side because the left side tends to be associated with childhood trauma. And so what we get as a result is relief from these, you know, from these symptoms. And it's not a silver bullet. It's not a magic cure. You know what I mean? But it gives guys the space that they need to do the work necessary to, you know, to achieve peace, contentment, and balance. And so what Stu, so for a long time, when it was just me and Drew, and I was trying to build the innovative wellness program. That's all we really focused on was, you know, helping people get the stellate ganglion blocked, and getting it funded and getting them up to Chicago or Annapolis or whatever. And again, Spookstock was picking up a lot of those bills for us, which is great. When Stu came on board, he took a much more holistic approach to wellness, right? And the idea that wellness is about choices. And a lot of the choices that we make on active duty are counterproductive to our wellness. So, you know, dipping, stop doing that shit. Dipping, caffeine, energy drinks, shitty sleep, all of these things, right, contribute to poor wellness. And so you can make a lot of choices. And so what we're doing with the wellness program now is we've developed not just access to the SGB, which is still a big part of what we do, but also access to all these other wellness capabilities. The idea is if you can identify what your particular wellness gaps are, we can introduce you to resources that may be able to help. So Stu's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I practice, but I don't give a shit about the belts or anything like that. I'm mostly people's punching bag. But, you know, Stu's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, big believer in the, you know, the social, physical, emotional, spiritual benefits of that particular form of exercise. And so we have partnerships with jiu-jitsu academies across the nation where if someone's interested in doing that, we can get them in for their first month for free. They get a free gi, you know, shit like that. There's a really famous jiu-jitsu master, Henry Akins, who has an online course. It's called White to Blue, because that's the progression in jiu-jitsu. You start with a white belt, and then the next one's the blue belt. So it's like a basic course. I think it retails for like $999, like $1,000. Anybody that comes through Donovan Bank that wants to access it, we get it for free. So we have, you know, and other things too, like Stu's been exploring HBOT, so hyperbaric oxygen therapy. He's been exploring, you know, we have relationships with programs that can get people counseling essentially for free. We partner with the Special Forces Charitable Trust, who has a program called Beyond the Battlefield, which is like, you go on their website, you get a QR code, you take that QR code to any behavioral health provider you want, and they'll pick up the bill for like 10 visits, or, you know, and then you can apply it. So that program is constantly expanding. No, I'm saying so that's Beyond the Battlefield. There's a program called Sound Off. That's where you can connect with a veteran peer to talk. And we have and Stu's constantly building new partnerships to help people fill their wellness gaps. But again, it's like everything else. You got to go do it. You've got to make good choices. And so, you know, one part of Janus 101 includes a wellness briefing where Stu talks about the available resources, but he also talks about all the things you can do just, you know, that don't cost anything. journaling, meditation, and nutrition, all these things. And so that program has really grown. So it's our second largest program. I think probably we get at least one or two new referrals to that program every day. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, that's why I needed to bring Stu on full time. I couldn't do it anymore myself. So that's probably our second. It is our second biggest program, and I can tell you that it's probably one of our most rewarding programs for us, because when people come back from the stellate ganglion block procedure, a lot of times they'll say things like, this procedure gave my kids their dad back. This procedure gave my wife her husband back. Or they'll say, this procedure saved my life. I was literally, while you were out getting lunch, I was texting real quick with a guy who we helped early on, who tried to commit suicide by police. He drove his car into his estranged wife. He drove his truck into his estranged wife's car. She wasn't in it. Got out, totally kitted up, fired a bunch of rounds into it, and then just waited for the police to show up and kill him. We found him. I mean, people came to us when he was incarcerated because a couple of his friends talked him down. He got arrested, was incarcerated. We were able to, we appeared at his hearing, pleaded with the judge to allow us to help him get access to treatment, got him released to the VA, then subsequently got him released to go to treatment in Chicago. He, went through their protocol. We got him down to a program. Actually, I'm not going to mention it because they ended up not being a great program. We don't partner with them anymore. They've become too bureaucratic. And ironically, like we talked about, they got contracted with SOCOM and then they turned to shit. We talked about the dangers of that, right? But anyway, long story short, his name is Tom. Tom now is living in Virginia. He's got his own, essentially, handyman business. He's reunited with his kids. He's divorced or soon to be divorced from his estranged wife. And my point is, I think once in a while I think about that guy, and look, it's not about me, but I take great satisfaction in, I know the Donovan Bank Foundation had a hand in saving Tom's life. And this was a guy who was a ranger back in the 2000s, had multiple deployments, got out, and was a contractor with Naval Special Warfare. So he was a contractor with SEALs. And this guy went through a lot of shit, and then he was an analyst, and that stuff wasn't. He went through a lot. He gave a lot. He sacrificed a lot. And so it's very gratifying to know that that's real impact that you can see. Like when you can see you've made a difference in somebody's life like that, and maybe brought them back from the brink of no kidding destruction. I mean, we were talking this morning when you first showed up. We all, unfortunately, we all know guys that have taken their lives. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that we're some kind of bulk walk against that, but I'm saying, some of the things we're doing have an impact that's that significant. The impact that we have with the Janus program and in general, it's really great. I mean, it's making a difference in people's lives. But a lot of those guys, they're going to do well. They're going to do okay. They'll have some struggles and all that other kind of stuff. But the guys that are really, when you have the ability and the opportunity to intervene or somehow be involved in somebody's recovery, because we send guys to Warriors Heart for substance abuse and all these other kind of things. Through the wellness program, that's really, really gratifying. We're just lucky. We're lucky that we've been able to put all this together and that we're able to to serve the community in this way.
So, the effect with that gland basically producing too much of the natural chemical that helps you for fight or flight. What's the chemical called? I always forget.
It's not. No, I don't think it's chemical per se. I don't think it's you're right. I mean, it has to do. You got to talk to Lipoff and Mulvaney about the science shit because it gets deep. But it has more to do with proteins. I can't remember exactly. The science gets lost on me because it's so detailed. But essentially, it's the amygdala being activated. Yeah.
My point to that is that it also, I know there's a lot of cases where people producing too much estrogen and their testosterone levels go down because their body, So for example, you'll have you'll have that situation, and I'm glad that you guys found your way into the wellness program, and it ultimately gave the capability for them to have like that dual shot therapy potentiality. But it's a continuous growth, right? Where people have to continually go to therapy, meditate, do the right things, take care of their body. I gotta quit dipping. It's my bad. It's my vice, man. I like to drink bourbon, man. I know who I am.
Yeah.
I'm working on it. But you know, you don't ever you ever had like a guy that is on that pathway of just darkness. You know what I mean? Just went too much trauma, and then like my buddy just came back. He said finally some dude at the VA took him enough seriousness, and I don't know if he said he definitely was indicating that he was like I was going to kill myself, and I was like I'm glad I didn't hear from years, like years. You know what I mean? I tried to get him back in the social groups and add him on Messenger and make him. Well, I'm always about community, connection and stuff like that. And he comes back and he's like, dude, you don't even know like where the fuck I was at. And I was like, I tried to, you know what I mean? There's only so much I can do for you myself. I'm not, you know what I mean? But like, he was like, dude, my estrogen level, my T levels were off balance. He said, now that I'm on testosterone and they're working on therapy and I cut alcohol down, I quit using nicotine. I might be still doing on and off, but he's like, I've reduced caffeine by a significant amount. He's like, to help my brain reset and so I can start producing the proper chemicals. He's like, I had zero dopamine. Like I was never happy ever. Like you could have literally gave me $1 million and I would have looked at you in the face. I'm like, cool, I guess I have $1 million now. You know what I mean? Like that kind of mentality. And so if you guys are impactfully giving people the opportunity to kind of find their way back into normalcy, I love that. So that's great.
Yeah, so one of our not partners per se, but I guess one of our organizational colleagues is the Special Operations Care Fund. They started about 12 years ago, and they're really focused. Most of the people that are involved from the beneficiary and volunteer side are all Delta guys, so it's really Delta heavy. They're expanding beyond that. But they're big right now. One of their big initiatives is a combination of it's testosterone replacement therapy, and then psychedelics. I don't know if it's ibogaine or ayahuasca. I'm not sure. And then, but there's a third element to it in this case. But anyway, they're big into hormone replacement. And yeah, I mean it's that's one of the things. So right now we are helping Dr. Lipoff recruit 20 people to be part of a epigenetic study. It's called the Grimm clock, the Grimm aging clock. UCLA, they can essentially look at your DNA and tell you, what your longevity is. I don't think I want to know, but they can do that based on DNA markers. And there's a possibility that the SGB procedure can actually impact that and extend your longevity. But one of the things they look at is part of that study is testosterone levels for sure. That's a big part of it. We don't really. I mean, we haven't really because there are other. So one of the things that we figured out early on for nonprofit success is refer, don't replicate. Don't try to do something that somebody's already doing well. Just send people there. And so when it comes to like hormone replacement stuff, we're sending them to. It's called SOCF, the Special Operations Care Foundation. We're sending them there and be like, hey, talk to these guys. They sponsor that. They promote that stuff, and they have the expertise and understanding and network, to help you get access to that as well. So that's one of the things that we've built over the last 5 years is a really, really extensive network of other capabilities. Because we can't do it all, we don't want to do it all, we don't need to do it all. Why would I try to do something that somebody's already doing really well? You know what I mean? Like, what a waste. So we just, we really try to take a truly collaborative approach. And it's tricky, because in a nonprofit space, again, that's one of the pitfalls of growing in a nonprofit is that the bigger you get, the more money you need to operate, which means the more money you need in general because people aren't interested in supporting organizations that have an unbalanced operational programs ratio, right? So the bigger you grow, the more money you got to raise, then your focus begins to to be on raising money, then you get protective about that. You're worried about somebody stealing one of your donors. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, if somebody who donates money to us is like, if I perceive that their heart is in, I don't know, equine therapy, as an example, I'd be like, you know what? We appreciate your support, but if this is what you truly are passionate about, here's 3 other organizations that do exactly. You should go help them, because now now you're going to, they're going to be continuously engaged. They're going to be, probably much more generous to something that they care deeply about, that their heart speaks to. But if all you're worried about is raising money, and you have a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset, you go, well, this guy's giving us money. If he goes and gives them money, I'm going to lose that money. You can't worry about that shit. It'll all come around eventually. Yes, fundraising is, I don't know. I see a lot of organizations that really struggle with it. We don't struggle with it. I mean, we could do better, of course. You know what I mean? We're scrappy. We're not exactly living paycheck to paycheck in this organization. We're okay, but we could be much more. We could have a much bigger safety margin. But again, it's funny. I see a lot of nonprofits that nickel and dime that shit horribly, and then it just doesn't work for them. I'm like, nah, you gotta build relationships. It's a long game. You're not walking into a room asking somebody for a check the first time you meet them. You know what I mean? But anyway, that's I guess that's neither here nor there. But
You can obviously just tell that you guys are all good stewardess of ensuring that proper care and accurate and people are placed into the correct positions. You know what I mean? So like, you're only recommending people that you validate, like people that are, have definitive capabilities that are like provable. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
let me,
so
not to cut you off, but I remember one of the things that somebody that I was say semi-mentored by initially from a nonprofit perspective were always fixated on, like, billionaires and centimillionaires, people with money. And I'm like, listen, man, that's all well and good, but I would much rather have people who give a shit about us. We have to have money, of course. We can't not. We need money to do it. As disgusting and gross as that is, you need money to do what you're going to do, period. The world doesn't work for free. But I would like, just because somebody has money, they're not coming inside the wire just because they have money. They have to be, people of character, of integrity, with a demonstrable record of philanthropy, giving back, and patriotism, all these things that matter to us. That's what we look for in the people that support us,
values and traits that you guys encompass as your nonprofit foundation. I 100% agree with you on that. So one thing that I definitely want to kind of elaborate on a little bit is so the psychedelics factor of this. I want your perspective on it, because have you engaged in it yet?
No, I haven't. So the only thing that I do that would be considered kind of close to that is I take 30 milligrams, not every night, a lot of nights. I take 30 milligrams of Delta 8, Delta 8 THC gummies to help me sleep, because I'm a sleep apnea guy. I got a CPAP, all that kind of stuff. But that's and every once in a while, and it's funny because as many improvements have been made to quality control when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's not just, I'm not buying it off of some fucking jamoke on a corner who just made it in his basement. You know what I mean? It's like regulated to a degree. There's still inconsistencies because it's a natural product. So sometimes, I'll take that. I don't feel anything at all, and just kind of, and it'll just help me sleep. And sometimes I'll take that stuff and I'll be like, man, I'm feeling pretty weird. You know what I mean? So you feel a little trippy, But no, that's the only thing that I did. So no, I haven't personally tried psychedelics.
So this is one thing, because like I like to smoke marijuana now that I'm out. I did it before I joined my recruiter. I'm not gonna dab me out, but I think that there's just definitive proof that psychedelic ibogaine and what's the other one?
Ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca.
285, yeah.
Yeah, so like there's just definitive. I mean, they're about to pass it through Congress. So like, if you can't get into, if you have certain debilitating, traumatic brain injuries, whatever the case is, like there's every single treatment is not one size fits all.
Sure.
That's one thing that people are kind of misrepresenting when it comes to these, like, oh yeah, like if you do ayahuasca or if you do delta 8 sleep, or you know what I mean, whatever the case is, or if you get the injections, it can potentially, but like people have to do a lot of research to make sure that you're going for the right treatment, you're putting yourself in the right placement. I think that's one thing that's not getting harped on enough, because people are like advocating for utilization of psychedelics. So sometimes if your brain chemistry could just be too far off, and that might not work for you. You might need to go to therapy. You might need to do another treatment before you can receive that treatment, so that way you ensure that you don't have a negative reaction, and stuff like that. So
yeah, so because early on, so the other thing I didn't mention, I kind of forgot about, was ketamine infusion treatment, right? So we do that as we help people get access to that as well, because it turns out that there isn't a lot of good empirical evidence yet. Most of it's anecdotal. That's part of the problem, right? It's not a lot of good studies yet, and big changes in medicine, or you think changes in the military take a long time. Medicine's even worse, right? So it's crazy, right? And so they need evidence based information to make these changes, but a lot of anecdotal information. And what it suggests is that by combining ketamine infusion and the stellate ganglion block, the stellate ganglion, it's like mixing weed killer and fertilizer in the brain, right? So the stellate ganglion block kind of opens the neural pathways, and then the ketamine comes in and restores neuroplasticity, reduces neural inflammation. And so guys who have suffered TBIs, who have previously been told that damage is you can't recover from that, see results and recuperative, restorative effects from the ketamine when it comes to TBI. So better memory, better recall, better focus. So that's a little bit of, I haven't done the ketamine either, but that could be that's also a treatment regimen. But you brought up people going and accessing this stuff with a one size fits all approach. And what I would say is, early on we started to recognize that we were getting into very dangerous ground, because I had all the ability, access, capability, money, everything. That if you came to me and said, "Hey, look, man, I'm kind of feeling this, and this," I could be like, "Oh yeah, man, we can get you up for SGB. We'll get you screened." And I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm technically not qualified to tell anybody that they're a good candidate for that stuff. But going back to what we talked to before, there's a real danger, because it's like, it feels really good for me to say to you, "Hey man, I can get you that treatment, no problem. We got you." The reality is, I'm not qualified to tell you that it's good for you, right? So we had a conversation with a really good dude. His name's Larry Royer. He's a psychologist at within the USASOC umbrella. At the time, he was at third group. And I was like, "Larry, you got to help. What should we do? How should we do this? Because we're in danger of making unqualified recommendations." And he kind of helped us figure out, you start with a behavior, like you refer them to behavioral health, and they're the ones who make the recommendations, and then we facilitate getting them there. All that to say that it's not necessarily a good thing that you just decide you want to go give this a try. You really need some professional guidance, and there is professional guidance, but there's also a lot of programs that all you got to do is show up and they'll fucking send you there. You know what I mean? And that could be dangerous. Could be also no big deal. But again, like you said, it's a crapshoot, and it's fairly unregulated. And although, there are bona fide, no kidding medical clinics in Mexico that do ibogaine. I met a guy, Dr. Jeffrey, I want to say his name is Camlet. I think that's his name. who is considered kind of a leading expert in ibogaine. I met him in an elevator in Miami when I was with one of our supporters. He lived in the same building. We started talking. He's like, "Oh, my supporter Antonio was like, he's like, oh yeah, this is Dr. Campbell. He does this. You guys should." And we jumped off the elevator and talked for a few minutes. And he has clinics in Mexico. He lives in Miami. He has clinics in Mexico called Beyond Clinics, and they do ibogaine. But I mean, it's a medical setting with medical providers, and I don't know, some of those places you got to be careful too because, there in most medical institutions you have two sides. You get the business development side and the medical side, right? And those two things don't necessarily meet. So Dr. Lipoff works for a company called the Stella Center, and they're kind of all over the country. But Stella Center is a business, and their priority is their profit, right? So for a little while, we had some issues that we thought we would be sending people to the Stella Center, and they would be appropriately screening them and be like, yeah, you're a good candidate. Yeah, you're not a good candidate. But they really weren't. They were kind of screening them, and regardless of where they came out on that, that screening criteria, they'd be like, yeah, you're a good candidate because that's money in the bank for those guys, We talked to Dr. Lipoff about that, and he interceded, and kind of got that sorted out. But you have to be careful, man. Everything is out there if you want it. It really is. But just because it's out there doesn't mean you should necessarily go and do it. You need the right kind of professionals helping you find the right path, just like you talked about. Figure out whether it's predisposition or it's brain chemistry, whatever it is. And then the companion to that is, like we said before, plenty of veterans organizations that'll throw money at you to go do that. They're not fucking qualified to do that, and they don't have the self-awareness to be like I take great pride in the fact that we were like, hey, wait a minute, we need to stop here and take a breath because we're getting into territory we're not qualified to be in. But it would have been very easy for me to go down the road and be like, yeah, we sponsor people to go to SGD. You want to go? We'll send you. It's been very easy for us to do.
So this is the thing about, the healthcare field and these experimental type of treatments that have.
Yes. Stop smoking and take gummies because smoke is still toxic. It's not good for you. And it stinks like shit. Gummies, they taste good and they don't bother you, and you're not putting any smoke in your lungs. So, all right, got it.
Gummies.
All right.
Yeah, but it's, what's THC versus like the Delta 9 or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, so what I was getting at is that, you have this. It's always you take the information from the smartest guy, right? So that's usually the guy with the PhD, the scientist, whatever the case is. But those guys, we talk to guys who listen to the experts in every field, right? So you take the information, you can regurgitate it, take it in. I mean, we to a clinical point, you could probably tell how treatment from nuts to bolts gets concluded. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing what we're talking about. Recommendations coming from people who are in that field or work with people in that field, but they're not clinicians. It's fine to listen to that type of stuff. It's like, if I have been through a treatment, I know it works for me, and I'm just trying to recommend that you maybe go and pursue that. It's not a negative thing. That's not what we're trying to get at. What we're trying to say is we're trying to be stewardess. We're trying to say, hey, you should take the right approach to things. You shouldn't just listen to face value. You know what I mean? The people that perceive themselves as the smartest people are fucking idiots. So you know what I mean? I'm trying to add humility to this. Is we listen to the information. We've heard the statistics. We've been through it. You know what I mean? Trial and error ourselves. And we're just trying to recommend the potentiality. Take this forward as with a grain of salt. If it's something you're interested in, if you're somebody struggling, not everybody in the military has PTSD. Not everybody has anxiety. I mean, a lot of people do, but you know what I mean? Take what you can from this conversation and apply it towards your life, or don't take anything from it and you just listen to some information and learn some shit about some people. It's cool. Not a big deal.
I mean, there's definitely a cottage industry of disability that is now cropped up, right? And so, when we talk to people about, filing a VA claim, it's not about getting 100%, the coveted 100% disability claim, right? Because, there's a cottage industry. There is a real thing out there that is, an E1, a private, who failed out of basic training and is collecting 100% for PTSD. That's a real thing, right? That's not who we are as a community, but it's getting to be more and more. What we try to tell guys is like, look, go in, let the system honestly assist you.
Just came up quick. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. Let the system honestly, assess you, because you and I are both 100% guys, and people are telling me, oh yeah, do your hardest day at PT before the physical exam, and when you go and see the psych, don't be too up. I was like, listen, man, I'm not going to be disingenuous. I am who I am. I'm not going to go in there and try to bullshit somebody. I didn't go in there and like try and tell them I was sad or depressed and all that, but and still ended up as a 100% guy, because after 36 years in the military, my shit is wore out. Does that mean I'm a broken man? No, of course not. Not at all. I'm never going to be as fast as I was, as strong as I was, as spry as I was when I was 25. That ship sailed, man. That's good. But I can still be as healthy. I can still be, well. But unfortunately, there is a groundswell of efforts. I mean, there's a lot of danger in clicking links on fucking YouTube, because when you do that stuff, your feed starts getting populated with crap. I've looked at some of these things because I wanted to look at them critically, and now I get besieged with all these paid services of all these guys whose intent is to get you 100% disability. In my opinion, if there's a rung below ambulance chasing lawyers, it's these services that help you with your VA claim for a portion, for money, because we clandestinely test a lot of systems. We've put ourselves into a lot of processes and systems to see what they're all about. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So, and we've tested a few of those, and I'm telling you, man, it's disgusting. They're like, "Oh, do you have PTSD?" We're like, "No." They're like, "Well, yeah, look, everybody's like," they're trying to convince you. That's how they help you get 100%. It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
So there's like a whole subsection of lawyer groups that basically, let's say you're 80%, they're like, I know I can get you to 100% if we just file this certain way. They help you fill the forms out, and they take the difference in what you were going to, if you were 100% the entire time or whatever the case is, they take that difference as their payment, because they're like, you're going to make it up. Don't worry. You know what I mean? Like, it's
not even
now.
It's not take financially. It's what they take from you psychologically. Because what we'll tell guys in Janus is, if you go down that path of trying to beat the systems just so you can get 100%, that's blood money. That is not going to sit well with you. That's not who you are. You know what I mean? Like, don't fall into that trap.
Yeah. I got a lot of things I had to put on there because, I fucking went hard. On my 10 years, I went hard as fuck.
Yeah.
I literally I got paralyzed on my first deployment. I mean, just unfortunate injuries that are unforeseeable, but I had years and years and years of physical therapy to stay like healthy as I possibly could. But like if you wake up in the morning and your objective is to rob the taxpayers of their dollars just so you can make an extra $1,000 a month that you could be easily making if you just apply yourself somewhere else, like, you're wrong.
Yeah.
That's the point of this.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to live with that. You might think you're living with it, but you're not going to have peace, contentment, and balance if you've gamed the system and you gamed the system. That just won't sit well, right? And look, here's the thing. People don't understand this. I heard there was a guy, he did a terrible job of explaining it. He was on the Rogan podcast, so of course millions and millions and millions of people, heard him explaining it, and he was 100%, disabled. And Rogan, and he was like, I don't understand. What do you mean? And he didn't explain it very well, right?
Yeah, you're talking about Mike Glover. Mike Glover went on.
That's right. That's right. Exactly what it was. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. You're right. It's like, damn. Because what people don't understand is that, the way that, they're like, well, you must be cheating the system because you're clearly not 100% disabled. 100% disabled means like you're like a lump on the floor. You can't work. You can't do it. It's like, no, man, that's not how that works. The way the system works is it specifically and intentionally evaluates every condition that you have independently. And then it aggregates it with an incredibly fucked up formula that they use, but it's irrelevant. For the people who don't realize, they take your highest disability rating. So for example, when I retired, sleep apnea was a 50% disability condition. Now that may change. I think they're going to change that in some time because of treatment and everything else. But let's just say you have a thing that's 50%. Turns out, if you're missing half of your penis, that's only 30%. So give you some perspective, right? I looked it up in the Code of Federal Regulation. All right, so let's just say whatever your highest thing is, right? So let's say you're 50%. That means you're 50% disabled and 50% able. The next thing that comes in, let's say you're missing half your penis, that's a 30%. That 30% applies to the 50% of remaining able. Yep. So that, you know what I mean? So each thing counts less and less and less and less and less and less as you go, right?
Yeah, it's a fractional system.
Exactly, right? Not complicated when you map it out, but some people don't get it, right? And the idea, and what people don't, and the system was designed, and I will grant anybody. So recently, the was it the Congressional Budget Office? I think it was the Congressional Budget Office, or it might have been.
So they
was it the CBO? I don't remember the organization that did it.
Fuck.
I think it was the Congressional Budget Office, or it just might have been the Government Accounting Office, might have been the GAO. Anyway, they do what professional government staffs do. They were like, okay, look for cost saving measures. Like, okay, this is what we'll look at this year. And so that's when that thing came out that they were like, hey, this VA stuff is really antiquated. And P.S., you got a guy like, Jocko Willink, who's 100% disabled. The guy's making millions, so we shouldn't be paying. There should be an offset if your income threshold is at a certain level. Okay, fair enough, whatever. But what they did point out, which is perfectly legitimate, is that this system, so the way it works is, let's say you have a bad shoulder, okay? I don't know what the technical diagnosis would be, but we'll just say for the purposes of this, the diagnosis is bad shoulder. So you have a bad shoulder and the VA looks at it and they say, okay, that bad shoulder we're going to say is a 10% disability. What that means is you with your bad shoulder versus a guy with a healthy shoulder, your earning potential in the marketplace is 10% less than this guy. Now, the reason that they say that is because it was developed when the majority of the workforce was manual labor, right? That doesn't really apply anymore. So it's somewhat antiquated. So they need to update that a little bit, right? But the bottom line is, when you look at a guy that's 100%, that's an aggregate of all these things. They look at them individually, say, okay, here are the, I think my problem list was like 26 diagnoses: back, neck, knees, shoulder, brain, all this stuff, right? And they're like, okay, you had a TBI and it's at this level, so that's 20% disability. Boom, it's in there. And then they aggregate them. So when you see, so it's not that a guy is 100% disabled. It's that a guy is being compensated for 100% quality of life compensation. It's a different kind of thing. You know what I mean? That people don't really fully understand. And that guy did a shitty job of explaining it.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I always try to get towards people that are pressing themselves to go to a med board. Like, I didn't want to fucking get a med board. Like, if your thing is quality of life care, you have to have quality of life care to stay healthy, then yes, go to the med board. Because you can't, the military's acute. They can only heal you one injury at a time. There's just not enough doctors. There's not enough physical therapists. There's not enough nutritionists to get you healthy. It just is what it is. Unless you're in a special operations community, and then you can just walk into a clinic any day and get fucking treatment.
You're surprised.
But it's a lot easier than the conventional forces is what I'm getting towards. And, referrals to go get an MRI or X-ray. What I'm saying is it's a little bit easier because they know how busy you are and they need that force to be able to work immediately. Because when you lose 1, 2, 3 guys out of a team, you basically just killed your fucking team and you got to redevelop everything. You know what I mean? Like if a dude breaks his leg, a guy got a TBI, and another dude has to have a shoulder surgery, you might not be able to deploy that force for 18 months now. Like they're going to be out of rotation. You know, their faces are going to be all jacked up. So what I'm getting towards is like if you have to do quality of life treatment forever, like I do, like where I have to get up and work through numbness and stretch every day, and I don't lift anymore because I'll be crippled by the time I'm 50. Yeah. Like, you know, that's truly what you should be getting objectively seen for, what you should be claiming, all that stuff. Like I haven't been able to smell in like 3 years. I don't know if it's from deviated septum or just chemical burns from my last deployment, but it's ridiculous and I hate it. But like, I don't even know if they gave me a percentage for it, but I was put it on the forum. I was like, it really does affect my life. I really like smelling things. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. But that's the things you put on there. It's literally quality of life changing disabilities. That's the stuff that you need to put on your paperwork. Now, let's say that you have you broke your ankle and it doesn't bother you. Well, it might in 10 years, or 20 years, whenever your bones start to degenerate a little bit. You know, your ligaments or tendons will start to fray over time. You put those down, they might give you 0% now, but the attributing factors is what you're trying to get in the future. So they can
totally. So you talk about hedging your bets, and that's exactly what it is. And I tell people all the time, these young guys when they get out. We have a lot of friends that got out. We use this one guy as an example all the time. We have a buddy who got out after like 10 years. It might have been less, it might have been 8 years. He was an SF guy, and he's like, "No, I'm good. I'm fine." And he was on a Halo team. He's on a high altitude, low opening. It's parachuting for people who don't know. He's on a Halo team. That's a lot of landings, a lot of hard landings. Like it's a lot of abuse on the body, right? Now he got out. Jesus, he might have got out like 10 years ago. Now that I think about it, but now he's starting to have back issues. He's starting to have knee issues, all this other kind of stuff, right? As a direct result of all of this really hard performance. But he has no, he put in no disability claim whatsoever, right? So we tell people all the time. So now he can't he can get the help that he needs, but that's coming out of his pocket, whatever it is, whether it's on his own personal health insurance or if he doesn't have that, he does. And so we tell people when you put in your VA claim, that's about hedging your bets long term. Because I can tell you, as a 55-year-old guy, we're here in Wilmington, North Carolina. We're on the beach with me, my wife, my 2 boys, and 3 of his college buddies. And we were playing spike ball. Spike ball is a little, it's got a little circle net, and you bounce the ball off it. So it's like volleyball rules, but you use it. The ball trickled off to the side. I went over to pick it up, and my back went out. It was brutal. Like, all I did was pick up this ball. I was just like, holy shit. I hurt myself. And I couldn't even sit down. And that shit persisted for like 3 weeks before it kind of came back. I was like, man, I better go get this checked out. I got an MRI and everything else. Each week, something, whatever. But my point is, we try to tell guys is that little thing that maybe just sort of is no big deal could become a very big deal 3, 5, 10 years down the road. And what you don't want at that point is to be fighting for the help you need and dealing with the injury, right? So you're hedging your bets long term. Because a 0% rating, that's great. That's they're acknowledging that it's a thing, so that if it exacerbates later, you can get the treatment that you can get the help that you need. Is it perfect? No. And I don't know if we said this on camera or not. We certainly said it earlier this morning. The VA gets a bad rap, but look, VA healthcare is no better or worse than civilian healthcare. It really isn't. And believe me, I've tested both systems. Remember I was telling you about how I hurt my hand and I had to get that X-ray and everything? Yeah. I did it on both sides. I did it through the VA and I did it through TRICARE. And they were basically the same. I could have got a referral to a orthopedic doctor, but shit, man, I wouldn't have gotten it. They're not seeing new patients for 2 months. It's the same thing, man. It's the same thing. So it's about hedging your bets long term. And that's part of what we preach in Janus is like understanding the VA claims process, when to get it started, how it works, the difference between medical appointments and VA appointments, partnering with a VSO to help you with your claim, all that stuff.
I gotta be honest with everybody out there. I still haven't applied for VA healthcare. I rate it. I gotta do my dental. I gotta do all that stuff. I have no excuses. I've been busy and doing things, but I have no excuse. I'll do it. I'm no better than you guys, by the way, even though I'm out here talking about shit. So it's real, recognize real, right?
Yeah,
so.
But look, it's funny though. One of the criticisms I do have, and I'm thinking about reaching out to Tom Allen about this is, once you get into the system, it's pretty functional. But holy shit, like trying to like get onto that system, you got to have an ID me account. It's really onerous, and you're dealing with old people. You know what I mean? Like the majority of veterans that need that help are old dudes who are just they're not gonna be able to navigate their way through dual factor authentication. It's crazy, right? So one of the things that I'd like to advocate for, and I plan on speaking to them about, is like, look, man, I get it. It's a medical system. It has to be safe and secure. But goddamn, man, I'm telling you, you have no idea how many vets you've just cast to the wayside because they simply can't access the system. And maybe that's part of the design and plan. Is like, yeah, we try to control the number of people, like, because if you don't want it enough, then you probably don't, you don't need it. But that seems like bullshit. I hope that's not what it is. But yeah, that's the one part of the system that still needs work, because my God, man, I don't care if somebody can see my X-rays. What are you doing? Like it's crazy. But generally speaking, it's not. I'm telling you, it's not the uncaring monolith that everybody makes it out to be. And I will tell you this too. And I mean, rarely, I'm talking like twice a year anymore, do I engage in any kind of conversations on social media. You're howling at the moon, man. Pointless waste of your time and energy. However, somebody posted this like tragic story about this Marine colonel who took his own life in the parking lot of the VA, sitting on like a stack of his medical records, as if to make a commentary through his tragic demise. And the post was all about like, what an injustice it was, and this and that, and all this other kind of stuff. And I came up on the net. I said, hey, check it out. I said, we are loath to acknowledge that in these situations, there is often shared culpability between the VA and the veteran, right? And I'm not trying to indict or to dismiss the tragedy of this guy's, this guy's demise, to speak ill of the dead. But what I have discovered is 9 times out of 10 in those situations, there's as much of the veteran's unwillingness to understand the system or do things the way they need to be done as there is the VA. You know what I mean? Like, we don't ever, again, it's that entitlement mentality. It's like, hey man, but did you do this, this, and this? Because look, I know guys that have, that have tried to get access to certain things, and I'm like, okay, well, have you done this? Are you in this system? Are you in that? And they're like, no. I was like, all right, well, let me help you do that. But I'm telling you, the guys that are just like screaming bloody murder about how they got fucked by the VA, I'm like, okay, what was your role in that? You know what I mean? Like, there's truth to that. I don't give a shit what anybody says. Yes, are there guys that could totally get the shaft despite trying to do everything right? Yeah, of course. It's a law of averages, man. But I'm telling you, like, there's a lot of other guys they're part of the fucking problem. Nobody wants to say that because, oh God, hey, guess what? I can say it because I did 36 fucking years in this institution. I'm one of them. Okay, I'm not some guy on the outside, criticize. No, I'm one of them. So I can say with almost unimpugnable authority that we have a role to play in that too. Yeah. So look in the mirror before you start screaming out the window.
Yeah. So I got friends that are in the VA, people that do claims and all kinds of stuff, and they're like, well, you wouldn't believe the unimaginable volume of information we have to process, and how many people just call, like, my buddy's mom, she is a scheduler for the psychiatric portion of the VA out in, I think she works for South Carolina. She lives in South Carolina. Yeah. And she's like, I don't even get to schedule the things. Most of the time they just start talking about what their problems over the VA. And she's like, I end up, she's all about mental health. obviously. And she's like, I just talked to these people for like 25 minutes. She's like, I got to take 10 more phone calls in that time period. You know what I mean? It's like that veteran's just upset and he wants to get it all out. And it's like, well, you probably could have did it online, or you missed an appointment and now you're on scheduling, or you just did something improperly and now you're getting the back end of the stick. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is.
No, the VA is like anything else. Look, they have no shortage of, little old ladies and little old men who will call you sweetie and honey and greet you and all that kind of stuff. And that's great. But like everybody else, they're short of providers. They don't have the medical professionals to do the work. So, I mean, it's a physics problem, man. You know what I mean? Like, he would, like, what? So you want, what, the PA to work from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. every night? Monday, 7 days a week? That's not really, you know what I mean? Like, they have limited capacity just like everybody else. They're suffering with the same shortages that everybody else is suffering with. So, I don't know. They get a bad rap, and my experience so far has been pretty positive.
So, as we're working on closing out here, I'll give you the opportunity to talk about the Donovan Bank wartime. And in Delta, when you're a Bray, was there any challenges that you had? Like, what was the communal challenges? Like, was there anything that was deeply rooted that was ever wrong with the organizations? Like, from like the leadership standpoint to the thought chain process. Like, for example, at MARSOC, entitlement. It was little dudes who just like thought they were above their enablers, above the soft truths. You know what I mean? It's like, well, just we're there for you, and then of course, you know what happened in Africa and some other shit that murders and whatever the case is. Was there anything ever like that in the organization?
In which?
So whenever you were at I guess first, but when you were at fifth and third, when you were operational.
Oh Jesus! Was there any dirty laundry inside?
No, I mean not necessarily dirty laundry, but what was the overarching? Was there? I know because I know the organizations pretty well. You know what I mean? Yeah. But was there? What was the identification factor? Like, was there anything that was ever like made the organization kind of stand still and have to reset the adjust? So because what I talked about, challenges in organizations, stuff like that. Like, I always talk about leading up, right? In the Marine Corps, there's a huge problem with leaders ever taking information from the bottom, the tactical level. You know what I mean? Was there anything ever like that in the organization? Like, where it's just like self-induced pain that shouldn't have been there that had to get worked through or anything like that?
Everything. So here's the thing, right? It's real. So remember this, and I would caution others too. It's really easy, and it happens really quickly, to be the old guy with naive levels of nostalgia, right? We were the last hard class, these guys all suck, all that other kind of stuff. And what I'll tell you is that, and it applies not just in the military, but in society too, right? So, the millennials and, this woke generation and entitled, man, that's all bullshit, right? I tell people all the time, like, we're in a really good place as a society, as a country. People don't think that, but I tell my mother-in-law, who I love. She's a wonderful, generous, caring, funny, kind person. But she's older, and she spends a lot of time, on the internet, reading headlines, and everything is, the world is burning down. And I'm always like, well, Carol, what did you guys do today? Like, walk me through your day. And it's always the same thing. They went to Starbucks, they got their coffee, they sat, they went got some groceries. But I'm like, yeah, it sounds like a pretty good day, right? Like, that's real life, man. The rest of that stuff is just wildly over-amplified noise that represents a percent of like the world, right? And so that's the same thing with, the next generation of kids, and the same thing with the state of the military. I tell people all the time, if you have any doubts about the future of this nation, then what I encourage you to do is go to, well, you'd need somebody to take you there, but go to Camp McCall, where Special Forces assessment and selection takes place. The attrition rate is huge. Most guys don't make it through, And you'll see young people literally killing themselves for the opportunity to be part of serving something greater where they may have to sacrifice their life. Like, go there and your faith in the nation will be restored, right? And the same thing about this, the next generation. I officiate at high school swim meets because both my sons were swimmers. My wife's a swim coach. She was like, "You need to get your ass off the sidelines and help out." So I became a swim official. And I can tell you that, so I'm around these like high school age kids. They're fucking awesome. They're awesome. I'll tell you a story. When I was, how old are you? Yeah, you're a baby. So, so this won't apply to your but my generation, we were not kind to people with disabilities. You know what I mean? We weren't tolerant. We were probably what by today's standards would be considered very cruel to people with disabilities, like a Down syndrome kid, right?
Let me talk to that real quick, because I did the same thing when I was growing up too. I think this is something evolutionary, by the way, and there's something that comes with us as a society growing so advanced in technology that you become aware that that is not inherently good to do. I think that was something that was acceptable before we got this overarching media to where you could say, okay. And then, of course, the science to go ahead and back that up as well. But I get where you're getting towards.
And my point is, we were kind of assholes, right? Let's say my generation, when it came to that in particular. Okay, so we're at a swim meet, right? And there's a kid, his name was Tyler. I remember it was 2 years ago. That was the last time he must have been a senior, I guess. This kid with Down syndrome, but he was on another swim team. And it wasn't like a Special Olympics or anything. He was just on the swim team, right? And he only did one event. He would do the 50 free. So that's up and back one time. And he couldn't dive off the diving blocks, so he just kind of flop into the pool and he'd swim and then he'd swim back. So I was the first time that I saw this kid at an event, at a swim meet. He jumps in, he swims. All the other kids smoke his bags, you know what I mean? Whatever. I'd say he's just turning around on the far end by the time everybody else finishes, right? And he starts swimming back. All of a sudden, this energy begins to build. It all focuses on this kid. And it's all these other high school kids. And this energy begins to build. They begin to cheer. And you know how when someone, you've probably seen it online a million times or experienced it dozens of times yourself. When somebody is like just gritting themselves through to that finish line. Everybody starts to build up, and then when they cross that finish line, everybody's like, so the energy begins to build, and the focus is on this kid, and they're all kind of cheering him on, and it just grows and grows and grows. And when that kid hits the final, when he finishes it, the place fucking erupted in joy and admiration and support for this kid who a few generations ago we'd have been basically shitting on, right? These kids, this generation who's so lost and so entitled and so woke, it was so beautiful to see and so emblematic of the fact that, oh yeah, these are all good kids. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't buy into any of that shit about like how fucked up the next generation is. Because guess what the generation prior to me was saying? Same thing about us, right? Just a repetitive cycle. Anyway, back to your question about, how things can be, what were the things that...
By the way, before you get going on that one, I want to shout out to the operators over at Marsoc. You guys are some of the most professional men I've ever worked with in my life. But that was one of the things that got some people in trouble, that kind of screwed over the organization. SOCOM came down, and Big Daddy SOCOM slapped them around a little bit and said, okay, well, you're going to be green suiters now. You can't wear black. You can't wear your hoodies at work. We're not maybe
growing pains too.
Yeah. So
right, Marsoc did, the Raiders did. But anyway, no, to your point, I guess my point in that is like the things that really kill us occur at much higher levels of like, just spinning around in circles about, roads to nowhere. You know what I mean? And especially in soft, our belief that we know better. You know what I mean? And the real power and consistency and excellence is always down at the team level, and that doesn't really change, you know. So no, I mean, and we also, you know, we also in the military. I tell you, the one thing that I think they're going to need to take a hard look at and probably reevaluate, and this is much bigger than soft. It's an Army problem and probably a DoD problem. So the incentive structure for officers in the military incentivizes obedience and, you know, being a company man. You don't get very far if you're a magpie. If you're the guy saying this is bullshit, that doesn't play well for a minute. That's why we're not good at innovation, because that's what true innovation comes. We're not really good at that, right? But the non-commissioned officers are supposed to be the guys that call bullshit on everything. You know what I mean? But what they did was they replicated the incentive structure for NCOs that they were using for officers. So now you're creating two parallel systems of kind of like yes men. Does that mean that they're all? No, not all that way. And the military is still the world leader when it comes to leadership and all these other kind of things. But I think that portends some, you know, some groupthink. You know what I mean? And it discourages like true out of the box thinking, and you know, the people who are gonna point out the inadequacies in the system, kind of thing. But again, you know, you got to be careful. You got to be careful about being the old man who thinks he knows better, right? And looks back with, like I said, naive nostalgia. But no, I mean, I can't think of nothing that was, you know, nothing that organizationally kind of stopped us in our tracks, or like, man, we got to rethink who we are and what we do. I think when we do that, it's, you know, look, a good example is Special Forces assessment and selection, right? Like, there are people who are constantly trying to figure out how that works so they can optimize it, figure it. And Stu and I were always of the opinion, especially when we were in charge of that thing, it's like, you know what? You don't necessarily need to know how it works. You just know that it does work. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, there's power in that, and there's wisdom in that, right? But no, I mean, I can't really. I mean, look, we could air dirty laundry for days and days and days and days, because there's plenty of, you know, everybody. There's lots of gong shows and mistakes and missteps.
The point of the question was saying that no matter the organizational structure, there's still kinks in every single system. That's what I'm getting towards. It's not to talk about the specific events or anything like that, but like, for example, you know, personalities were a killer over Mars. Like, you had some dudes that could work with everybody, and you had some dudes that were just swinging their hammer as hard as they could all the time, and they thought they were exactly what you said, 100% right about everything all the time. Like, you could not convince them to do any other direction other than one they believed. It's like, oh, your priorities work today. I don't like those. Go ahead and find a new set of those that and if you don't think, and then they'll switch them. It's like, oh, your your tactics, you know, we're training this way. No. And then another guy comes in, and then they start fighting each other. And it's like, man, I'm just trying to get certified so I can go deploy, man. You guys stop fucking your overheads. It's like, you have two Indians that aren't really being, they're trying to be chiefs, but realistically, they may be chiefs, but they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Or if they do, both of them really know what they're talking about, but they're on opposites of the spectrum on how to solve the problem. And you're like, man, I'm like the guy in the middle just getting crushed, like the tactical level. You know, I had to do 6 more hours on a training event that I needed to, because I had to repeat something because 3 guys taught 3 different things.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
The difference between leadership and management, right? Leadership, in my opinion, you become a leader when you understand that leadership is about enabling the success of others so that they can achieve more than you've achieved, which means that you are now invested in them. It's not about your ascent to whatever you think you should be, you know, ascribing to. You're there to help them succeed, right? But a lot of guys come into those situations with, you know, with a lot of insecurities, you know, and they're not, and, you know, they want to appear like they know everything and they're the smartest guy in the room. And it's like, no, man, that's not how that works. You know, it's okay if that person, he's supposed to know more about that than you do. So you should empower that. You should trust that. You should encourage that. But that's, you know, that's a whole another conversation about like leadership. And yeah, that's how I kind of see that.
Well, I just have the opportunity to have somebody that was inside group, and there was a saw guy and special operations dude. You know what I mean? Like, it worked in the organization at pretty high levels and was employed around some of the most efficient organizations and structures and stuff like that. So it's always like, even though you're at the top of the food chain theoretically in the military, like, your most elite organization, of you guys, and Delta, and every, I mean, like, it's just that organizational structure is like the most elite of the elite. Is that ultimately a lot of the organizational structures have about the same iterations of leadership struggles and power dynamics and stuff like that that affect the organization. That's what I was trying to get towards, because people think that special operations is any different from the conventional forces. It's like, not really. The difference is the amount of quality you have to put into these people, and the desire for these people to go through. They're suffering a lot more to go through and prove and have that identity and make themselves an operator or an enabler or whatever the case is. You know what I mean? Like, they have to go through a trial by fire that's significantly different than any other organization. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So
the danger in that is that you somehow, by going through that, you're encouraged to believe that you're better than somebody else. You know what I mean? It's like, no, man, you're not. Like, I never did I can't think of a single operation of significance that I did essentially like on my own. You know what I mean? Or that we did on our own. You always need something. You need some expertise from somebody else. And, they're probably really good at what they do. And, so to start to think that, I tell people often, especially when it comes to transition, you were part of something special. You're not special. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And understanding that, I think, is a step in understanding that, you're not better than somebody else. Yeah, you've done. That's very dangerous. You know what I mean? To go down that path, because, for a lot of reasons. But anyway, I don't want to. Yeah.
No, I like I said, it wasn't a super deep thought process for this one. I just wanted to basically say, like, the organization that you work for, elite of all elite, and I've talked about this as a leadership struggles throughout the military. Even though I'm talking to veterans, people take over some of those things into the civilian world. They take those anecdotal behaviors and they apply them to things in the real world. And like, yeah, it could have worked while you're in the military. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to say, like, every organization has these type of structures that are not conducive. And even though the best of the best of the organizations, they still have the same things as anybody in the low chain, that the non-deployable unit and frickin' Navy that sits on Norfolk and processes fucking visas administratively. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, that person still has that type of leadership dynamic and struggle, even though he's the one that's doing all the work at the level. You know what I mean? Whatever the case is. It was just it was something I wanted to ask you before we end up closing out. It was like, what was your experience? Was there anything that affected the organization? Not holistically, didn't shut the place down, but like, was there any struggles? Like, and like, I always found that it usually comes down to to overarching over empowerment from higher, like, that doesn't allow you to operate appropriately. And then it comes down to that power dynamic when you're talking to those personalities or people
we're in the people business, man.
Yeah. So
we were in the people business. For sure.
You still in people business.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. All right, I want you to talk about anything. Oh, we did talk about it, so we don't have to talk about it. But the fifth thing kind of got almost glanced over earlier was the pay to play. So it's not on the website yet. The pay to play it's a thing.
Right. It's a fee for service where we're gonna we will go to companies that are interested in improving their veteran recruiting and integration, because our sense of it is the approach is wrong. And companies are being encouraged to embrace this idea of accommodating, the veterans, which is again feeding into the veterans as a victim narrative. And if you do that, like I said, You'll get veterans, but you're not going to get the good ones. You know what I mean? And believe me, we got a bell curve, right, of veteran quality. But veterans need to be challenged. And so our approach is going to be to help them to design veteran recruiting that encourages people to meet the challenge of coming to work here, so to speak. You want to come work here, you need to rise to that challenge. That's what veterans respond to. That's a way healthier way to look at it. And so, and the other thing too is corporations don't want professional development that lasts 8 hours all day long. You know what I mean? So it won't be like a Janus seminar. It'll be like a 1 or 2 hour, block that helps them to think about it differently.
I wanted to kind of bring it back up again. I know we talked about it way earlier in the conversation, but it's one of the things that hasn't been put on the page. People can't go check it out if they don't come and listen to the full podcast. They'll just miss it, and the people that do listen to it will know that it's coming as a construct. So, is there anything else you want to plug in for Donovan Bank?
No, man, look, people ask us all the time, hey, what can we do? And it's always the same day. It's like, spread the word, man. Like, spread the word. We just want people to know that we exist. There are, obviously people's support is always welcome. But the biggest thing that people can help us, the biggest way that people can help us is simply by spreading the word. I mean, that's huge for us, because you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at, how often someone will reach out to us and we're like, yeah, man, just come to one of our workshops. We're there twice a year. How do you not know about us? But, it's an insular community. People are focused on what they're doing. They're not thinking about transition. They don't even know where to look, But no, I think, like I said, that we could just keep going and going and going and going and going. I mean, there's so much to talk about when it comes to this kind of stuff. But, anybody who's listened this long ought to have their fucking head examined. Like, I don't know what they need a hobby. They need to do something else in their life. But if they make it to this point, that's the thing I would tell them. Like, just spread the word, man. Or, the other thing I tell people all the time is, if it doesn't matter if people support us, they should support something. Dude, maybe you're passionate about immigration, or maybe you're passionate about, like I said before, feeding the hungry or housing the homeless or whatever it is, man. Like, you don't have to give back to us, but give back to something like that. If we can inspire that, like a lot of times at the end of the special operations experience, people have to pay 10 grand to be there. Well, they have to donate 10 grand to be there, right? And not everybody does, because we invite some people to come because they bring value in other ways, but most people do. Some companies will donate 40 grand and they'll use it as an incentive or a bonus for their employees that they go and get to do this. But at the end of it, we do an appeal. So not only do you make a donation to be there, but that covers fuel and ammo and food. I mean, we don't really make a huge amount of money off of that thing because it's really expensive to run. And so at the end, we do a donation appeal. And a lot of times I'll say, hey, look, we'd love to have your support. You can give us your time, your talent, your treasure, and we'd love to have it. But if you're not inspired by what happened here today, then the best we can ask of you is to go out and leave here better than you arrived and go give back to something. If it's not us, that's fine. It doesn't have to be us. It doesn't even have to be a veterans organization. Just give back in some way, shape, or form. And hopefully, we'll have a greater impact than just the one we're trying to
have. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, your organization is excellent stewards. You know what I mean? Like, you have great stewardship. You guys have, what sounds like, based off our conversation, is you guys have great humility. You're willing to adapt to and learn and then pass over information that could benefit other organizations and other people. It doesn't have to just come down to you guys. You guys have came to a realization that, like, early on, which is great, is that, we don't want to grow too big. We want to be organic. We want to take care of the people that we can take care of. And for the people that are outside of our scope and range, we're going to create the connections and relationships to put them on the correct path. And that's awesome. As I come to my final thoughts and close out here, I want to thank you for being my guest. Earlier you thanked me. I've I think this is a thankless thing. I think it just needed to happen. That's why I started doing it. I wanted to give people the opportunity free of charge, me traveling. I got a lot of time. I'm young and I got some money put back. So I was like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to take care of some people, and like I told that story earlier, I said, if I help one person, I did exactly what the podcast is designed to do. So if you guys get one more donation, or if another operator who didn't know about it finds out about it, or somebody else, whoever the case is, finds out about this and does it benefits, or people just take this conversation and they look throughout and they decide, oh, I'm going to go on a treatment plan, or whatever comes from this is what the whole point of the podcast is. So I'm just fortunate to be here with you, having this shared experience, which is awesome. So I'm going to do you have any more? I'll turn it over to you one more time. If not, I'm going to close this battle area.
Thanks so much for having me. Hopefully you can navigate your way to something to eat. I recommend going to the beach. It's lovely here. I'm probably going to do that tonight, although my buddy Jared refuses to swim at dusk or dawn because he's pretty sure that's when most shark attacks take place. I'm like, I think you're good, man. No, I appreciate it. Obviously I'm a very verbose, extroverted guy. I love chit chat with people about this stuff. Obviously, I'm very passionate about this. I'm super lucky that I get to be committed to this thing and do this, do this for a living now. And I'm just appreciative of the opportunity. I'm appreciative of you making the effort to come here and, and come to me and travel. And I think what you're doing is really awesome. We'll do our part to reciprocate and spread the word about this podcast. Cause like you said, you never know where these things will lead. I used to think, oh man, a podcast. I heard a guy make a joke. As a matter of fact, it was either John Mulaney or Jim Gaffigan. He's a comedian. I try to go to a lot of comedy shows. And he came out and he was like, hey, it's great to be here. I want to congratulate you all on your podcast. And obviously the joke is like this, what started out as thousands, now there's probably millions of them, right? And so I used to think, this is point. We're just going to be lost in this sea. But I'm telling you, it's not that way at all. You know what I mean? Because you're right. They all have the potential to just make that one small connection or piece of information, or that one thing that opens somebody's heart or mind or eyes to something that they didn't know, that could either help them, help somebody else, and then help themselves. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And I appreciate you let us be a part of it.
So wise words coming out today from a retired Green Beret,
humble government servant who wasn't qualified to do anything else. Yes.
Retired Green Beret, Paul Toolan, executive of the Donovan Bank Foundation. If you didn't hear it a few times during this conversation, if you have the opportunity, go check them out. I recommend it. I was super fortunate to have found them online. What a crazy world we live in. So, as always, to the listeners of the podcast, 25 to 50 on each platform that share and like and follow and do the business, and the several hundred that periodically click on things and I get the analyticals for it. Thank you very much. If you have the opportunity to like and share and follow his pages and their foundation's pages, and do it as well. I mean, I'm sure he would greatly appreciate it, you sharing his content, and he will not yell at you, and I won't either. So use my stuff as you see fit. I'm not that wise of a man, but I try my best. So thank you to the viewers. This is episode 7. What a crazy experience so far. I keep saying it every single episode. It's wild that I'm here right now. So episode 8 is pending for you folks. I have a couple organizations. I just don't want to travel to those states and skip states if I have the opportunity to fill them in. I'm going to if I don't. So I'm just letting you guys know that if I don't hit every state, the design was to try to hit every state. If I can, I can't. So anyways, thanks for tuning in to the Fire and Forget podcast. Thank you, Paul, again. You're the man. I appreciate you. And we'll see you guys and talk to you guys soon.